the 11th in a series of hearings conducted by the joint fiscal committees of the legislature regarding the governor's proposed budget for fiscal year 2019-2020. Hearings are conducted pursuant to New York State Constitution and the legislative law. Today, the Assembly Ways and Means Committee and the Senate Finance Committee will hear testimony concerning the governor's budget proposal for local government officials and general government. I'll introduce members from the Assembly, and Senator Krueger, Chair of Senate Finance, will introduce members from the Senate. In addition, our ranking Ways and Means member, Will Barkley, will introduce members from his conference. So far we have from the Democrat Conference, Chair of our Cities Committee, Ed Braunstein, Assemblyman Charles Fall, Assemblyman Harvey Epstein, Assemblyman Jonathan Jacobson, Assemblyman Robert Carroll, Assemblyman David Buchwald, Assemblywoman Mahoney, and Assemblyman Nader Sayegh. Karen McMahon, sorry. And Assemblyman Barkley for your conference members.
Thank you, Chairwoman. We're joined by our ranker on local governments, Colin Smith, and we also have, I think just stepped out for a moment, Nicole Maliatakis.
Yes. Senator Krueger.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to all. And I'm going to be introducing my senators. Senator Jim Gorin, Chair of Local Government Committee. Senator Robert Jackson, Chair of Cities Committee. Senator John Liu, Chair of Education in New York City Committee. I'm going to stop with naming chairs now. Senator Brian Benjamin, Senator Jessica Ramos, Senator Shelley Mayer, Senator Diane Savino, and we're also joined with our Republican ranker on finance, Senator James Seward, and I see Senator Gustavo Rivera entering as I stop my list. Thank you, Assembly member.
Thank you. So I would just remind witnesses that we do have your submitted testimony, so to the extent both keep within your allotted time limit and also summarizing your comments will be helpful as we go along. All the written testimony is part of the record. And for members, just to remind people, we have a time clock, and the time will show up. There'll be a green light, then a yellow light when you have 1 minute, and a red light will flash to say that your time is up, and the time for members is both for questions and answers. We're going to start with the mayor of Yonkers, Honorable Mike Spano, to accommodate, and we want to send our condolences to you and your family, and we're happy to accommodate your situation today so you can attend to that.
Press, could you move over from where you are so that you're not in?
And following Mayor Spano, we will return to our original order with Mayor de Blasio.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure.
And Chairwoman Krueger, Chairwoman Weinstein, distinguished members of the Assembly and the House, thank you for your indulgence, for allowing me to come up. As you can imagine, it's been a rough past 20 hours. This is obviously very important, and I'm up here today to speak about Yonkers. What I will say right up front is reflecting on my time as mayor of Yonkers over the past 7 years. My testimony won't be very different than it's been over the last couple of years, so you probably can predict what I'm going to say. But I will also tell you that despite our challenges, Yonkers continues to succeed. Over the past 7 years, our unemployment rate has hit the lowest it's been since 2000. There's about $3.5 billion in private investment that has resulted in thousands of new permanent jobs. Also, with the help of our great governor, Andrew Cuomo, and of course, all of you in the state legislature, we've been able to improve the fiscal outlook of our city, and today Yonkers bond ratings are the highest than they've been in a generation. Our graduation rates are up. We are leading the way with the big 5 cities. Yonkers is the highest graduation rate of all the big 5. Crime rate is the lowest that it's been in recorded history. And people are starting to change their view of Yonkers. And despite the successes that we've had over the years, we do we still have those severe budgetary needs that we talk about each and every year. Here are the hard facts that we can't ignore about our Yonkers schools. Over the years, you've heard me speak of the startling deficiencies that Yonkers schools still face due to necessary cuts in services. 12% of our students are learning English for the first time. 17% of our students have disabilities. We need psychiatrists, social workers, school counselors in every school. We don't have them in every school currently. We need art, music, technology to be part of every student's educational experience. It is not part of every one of their experience. We need a modified and junior varsity sports program offered to all students in the district. It's currently not offered to all students. We need pre-kindergarten, as we all know, supported every year as a mandate, right, as a state mandate, not just offered when grant funding is available. You know, we're deficient in the current resources provided to us, yet our district's enrollment continues to grow. The city of Yonkers, the big city outside of New York City, is the city that continues to have enrollment growth, while many others have declined or stayed the same. The reason why Yonkers Public Schools have been able to succeed in certain categories is because of our annual pleas to all of you with one-shots. And you have been there for us, and I have to say that. But it's, in large part, at least for us, has been somewhat of a Band-Aid approach. It helps us for the year. We would never not say thank you for that. But there are still major problems with the foundation formula that need to be addressed. You know, the foundation formula appropriates nearly $8,000 per pupil by formula. The next closest city to Yonkers, the next pure city to Yonkers, gets about $4,300 more per pupil. Total federal, state, and local cost-adjusted classroom funding for Yonkers students lag our sister cities, cities like Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo, by approximately, $2,000 to $3,000 per pupil. So based on enrollment, that is a difference of about anywhere between $52 to $79 million. That is numbers that the local taxpayers cannot sustain. We cannot get past that. It is impossible. So this year we are looking in our current fiscal year at a $60 million status quo budget shortfall for the Yonkers schools. And our issues can be explained, and our expenditures can be explained very, very easily. But one thing we know for sure is that our expenditures are outpacing our revenues. And I mentioned earlier that there is no way that Yonkers taxpayers can afford to fund this problem alone. Foundation aid is based on on the wealth of a municipality. And Yonkers has exhausted its wealth. And let me take a moment to explain it. We are right now at a 92% constitutional, of our constitutional taxing limit. And so if we were even to max that out and make that 100% of our constitutional taxing limit, we wouldn't come close to meeting the shortfall that the taxpayers are having. And so essentially what that says to each and every one of you is that the city cannot fund its shortfall, hence the kids will suffer. You don't let that happen, and we're hopeful that you'll work with us to make sure that doesn't happen. We were taking a look at just our maintenance of effort. And our maintenance of effort, which is quite extensive, has a number of things that aren't even included as part of the traditional maintenance of effort. Like, for instance, the city side pays the debt service of the Board of Education. And if you look at that, our numbers are 69% of our budget goes towards education. So let's not forget that we've exhausted other means of revenues, and what I mean is we have a gross utility, we've exhausted gross utility tax, real estate transfer tax, mortgage tax, hotel occupancy tax, cable franchise tax, resident income tax, non-resident income tax, our sale and use tax revenue, which is at $90 million, also provides for education. And the fact is, and this is another, I think, pretty surprising fact, is that while people look at cities, let's say like Rochester, and say, well, you know, Rochester doesn't have the economic base that Yonkers has. And I will have to tell you that I was very surprised to see that, that Rochester's sales tax is about $150 million, a city that is roughly the same size as Yonkers, and our sales tax is $90 million. Why? Because we compete with New York City, we compete with White Plains, we compete with areas around. We are not the exact center of sales tax revenue. So Yonkers' wealth is not nearly as strong as the formula may suggest, and excessive taxes have hampered our ability to allow our residents to use their disposable incomes in other places. Real estate property taxes were raised last year by 6%, so now that stands at $378 million, and it brings us to 92% of our constitutional taxing limit. So we've done all we could. I know I only have 2 minutes left, so I took a lot of time there. I'll ask that just to, real quickly, I'll ask, as far as the casino is concerned, Yonkers Raceway is now owned by MGM. We'd ask that you might look at doing something to expedite doing the licensing for full gaming quicker. That would help out, certainly help us out in our revenues. It would also help out with job development for the city. And I also ask that you allow sports betting to happen in the city of Yonkers. That would be critically important to the city. I know you're doing it for upstate. It would be very helpful for Yonkers. You know, Yonkers Raceway had 8 million visitors there last year. We expect that this is going to continue to be a real drive for Yonkers and for the region. And our rebuild schools. We have to rebuild our schools. We're 4,500 kids over capacity. Yet last year you helped us with an enabling legislation that provided us a double MCA, which was, I want to say thank you to our delegation for making that available to us. But still, the local share would be $153 million. That's money that, when you're at 92% of your constitutional taxing authority, just isn't there. And so what I'm asking is that if the changing of the formula to allow us to reflect the sister cities of upstate isn't possible, that you at least look at the potential of a block grant of anywhere between $50 to $100 million that would provide an offset for the local share of course, of building our schools. If we borrow $30 million in Yonkers, that's 1% of the tax levy, 1%. So think of it this way: we have to borrow $153 million to build those schools. If you don't mind, I'll be real quick. I can just see if there's anything else I need to wrap up on, and I believe I got everything I needed to get in, Madam Chair. And with that, let's open up for questions. I'm also joined by John Jacobson, who's our Budget Director, and John Lazuski, who is our Finance Commissioner.
Thank you. Do you have the Assembly doesn't have any questions at this time, the Senate?
Thank you. Senator Robert Jackson.
Good afternoon.
Hi,
Good morning,
Senator.
Mayor. Let me express my condolences to you and your family. Thank you for coming in. I see that in your testimony, you spent a lot of time on education. And so, understanding how important education is, I would assume that you support what the Board of Regents and the Commissioner is saying, that we need to fully fund the campaign for fiscal equity under the Foundation Aid formula, which is $4 billion statewide. I want to know what's your opinion on that, or do you agree with the governor that CFE is a ghost of the past and a distraction to the present?
Well, I'm not going to characterize, I didn't hear what the governor had said about that. But
That's what he actually said.
Yeah, but I'll tell you real quick about what I think about full funding of the formula. When the school formula isn't funded fully, cities like Yonkers, where wealth doesn't work, the wealth factor of this formula doesn't seem to work for a city like Yonkers for a host of reasons. We end up getting clobbered in that scenario. We're down, I think, another $42 million just from the CFE. And so, yeah, I mean, of course, I'd be for the full funding of the formula. That goes without saying. I mean, it's the campaign for fiscal equity. I lived it when I was up here with all of you. It was a promise we had made, but then the economy dipped, and we had to make some hard choices. Hopefully, I think for the sake of all the municipalities, that we'll see a change in direction on that.
Now, you indicated in your testimony that Yonkers, I believe you said, has the highest graduation rate of all of the, I guess,
Of the Big Five.
Yeah. What is your graduation rate, if you don't
Uh,
know? Because our mayor,
80s.
Mayor de Blasio, has boasted our graduation rate is about 75%, the highest that has ever been. So I'm curious as to what your graduation rate is.
We are 86%.
86%.
Which we're very proud about that. You know, it's a district that has a lot of challenges. As we all know, in the district, in the surrounding districts, they're graduating at 99%. None of us are going to be happy until we get that number. But the reality is that our kids have challenges, but our kids are just as bright, just as determined, and our teachers and the administration have really done a remarkable job in turning the district around.
Mayor, so if in fact the monies that you feel you need in order to run your city, to give the children of Yonkers the education they rightfully deserve, if you don't receive that type of money in this budget, what are some of the consequences of if that's not obtained?
Yeah.
And I don't want to think negative, I want to think positive, but I want to know all the parameters.
Yes. The consequences are real, and the consequences are very simple. What happens when you have a school district that already has overcrowded classroom space, does not have enough guidance counselors, does not have a full music, art, and sports program? Well, you're going to have less of those things. And you may see complete cuts of many of those things. That's not something that our kids, especially our kids in the big cities. We all know that our kids, the struggling families, are in the cities. They're not all in the city, but we know that their concentration is in the cities, and that our kids who have the greatest needs, because they're some of the greatest challenges, the only way out of poverty is with a good education. We want to make sure that they are getting the same type of educational opportunity that they're getting in the suburban schools. It shouldn't be, I go to the other side of the train tracks, literally, the other side of the train tracks, and our kids have, classroom space that's beautiful, that they have full art, full music, full sports, and these are great. These really help enhance their educational experience and allow them to achieve higher goals. And that's why we've been fighting so hard. We have put something back each and every year for the past few years, incrementally, put back full-day pre-K, obviously with your help and help of the legislature here. We put back a modified sports program. We put back a lot of our sports programs that we wanted, but certainly not all of them. But these are the things that you will lose. It's the whole idea of social bankruptcy. We'll lose the things that can really help our kids excel and go into this new world economy. if we're not careful about what gets cut.
Well, Mayor, let me thank you for coming in. So my message to everyone is that if in fact we collectively feel that our children are entitled to more under the foundation aid formula, I ask you to join in with me in communicating with the governor and ask your parents and educators to do the same thing and keep the pressure not only on the governor, but on the legislature to do the right thing collectively on behalf of the children of your district.
Senator, thank you, and I appreciate those comments. And just so you know, tomorrow, the Yonkers kids are coming up by the bus roads.
Good.
Just to deliver that message, so
Thank you.
we'll be up here.
Thank you very much.
Since we started, we've been joined by Assemblywoman Nolan, our Deputy Speaker, and Assemblyman Thiel, Chair of Local Governments, and to Mr. Barkley.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and good morning, Mayor. I don't think many people know, but when I started in the Assembly, I had the honor of sitting next to the mayor, and he always said to me, "What's in it for Yonkers?" And then I had the pleasure of being in conference with the mayor, and every time he asked staff, he always said, "What's in it for Yonkers?" And this year is my first time as the ranker on Ways and Means, and it's good to have you in front of us asking what's in it for Yonkers. So great seeing you, Mr. Mayor, and I just want to give my condolences to you and your family.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Senate.
Hi, we've been joined since the last time we listed by Senator Sepulveda, by Senator Brian Kavanaugh, by Senator Brad Hoylman. I've seen them come out and go back in. I also want to offer my condolences to you and your family and appreciate your coming today. And on behalf of Andrea Stewart Cousins and Shelley Mayer, who's here but isn't a member of the committee so can't ask questions, to assure you that our conference is very, very focused on trying to address the concerns of Yonkers and the other big 5 cities in New York State. And I just want to turn it over to Senator Jim Seward for 1 second.
I just want to acknowledge the presence of Senator Bob Antonacci, who's joined us as well. And I have no question for you, Mayor, other than on behalf of my conference, I want to express our deepest sympathies and condolences to you and your family.
Senator, thank you so much.
Your father was a great man.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Nick, and Nick, I'm sorry, Mike.
Been happy your whole life, right?
Yeah.
To all of you, I very
Sorry,
much appreciate
but-
your indulgence. Thank you.
On behalf of all our members, I think each one would like to personally wish your condolences, but so that we could move on, thank you for being here. I'm glad we were able to help you out today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Okay. Carl's here.
And here's Andrea. Yeah. So in a moment, we're going to be joined by the Honorable Bill de Blasio, Mayor of the City of New York. I think should be walking in the door momentarily, was in a holding room. To come? Yeah. 5 minutes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll save the hellos for a different time, the personal hellos. Thank you. We have your testimony, and feel free to begin. Just be mindful, we have 15 minutes on the clock, and that light will flash yellow in front of you when there's a minute to go, and I know there's a number of members who have questions, so I'm sure everything will come out in our questions.
Chair, I will follow instructions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Chair Kruger, Chair Weinstein, Ranking Minority Member Senator Seward, and Assembly Member Barkley, and of course, our legislative leaders, Majority Leader Stuart Cousins, and Assembly Speaker Hasty, and all the members here today. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you. I want to begin by congratulating all of you. This has been a historic time. What you've done in this session has been outstanding already, and you've done it with lightning speed. A whole host of issues that, for many of us, we have waited for decades for action on. I want to thank you also for your continued focus on the needs of 8.6 million people who live in the 5 boroughs. Last week, I presented my preliminary budget for the City of New York, and I was compelled to deliver sobering news. The budget for fiscal year 20 faces 3 major uncertainties. First, the economy shows increased signs of a slowdown, and our personal income tax revenues are projected to be almost $1 billion less than what we collected last year. Second, the city faces $600 million in potential cuts and cost shifts in the current state executive budget, and that was before the recent announcement of an additional shortfall that the state is experiencing in personal income taxes. And then third, of course, another possible government shutdown in Washington, and we have calculated the impact of that once it takes full effect New York City residents will lose approximately $500 million a month. That's $500 million a month in direct support from the federal government, $100 million additional negative impact on city government. That would start in May if the shutdown were to occur soon. As I continue, I also want to note, of course, I'm joined by two key members of my administration, my city budget director, Melanie Hartzog, and our director of state legislative affairs, Simonia Brown. They'll be joining me in answering your questions. So I mentioned that we have seen real areas for concern in our budget. For this reason, we have set a mandatory savings target of $750 million that we will meet by April at the time of our executive budget. So this is on top of the savings programs we had in effect previously, on top of the healthcare savings that we have achieved with our colleagues in labor. This is an additional $750 million in savings that we must find. We will, for the first time ever, be instituting a PEG program, a program to eliminate the gap. Every city agency will be given a numerical dollar figure to cut back, and there will be a deepening of our existing hiring freeze. Now, our preliminary budget has a few but very limited investments, the smallest since I first took office, and I want to be clear, depending on how events proceed, we may have to further limit or slow down or cut some of these investments, and of course that will be painful to city residents and to all of us who serve them. Now I want to focus very quickly on 5 major issues and then a few other smaller issues, but I'll do this very quickly. First, strongly support the 3-year extension of mayoral control of New York City schools. Mayoral control is working. My administration has made it our focus to bring equity and excellence to our schools and to reach children in every zip code more effectively. We've provided every 4-year-old with free, high-quality, full-day pre-K with your great assistance, and we are now moving on to 3-year-olds. 20,000 3-year-olds will have free early child education as of September. For the 5th year in a row, we've set a record graduation rate today. 3/4 of our students graduate high school on time. That compares to under 50% before mayoral control of education. And also this last year, 59% of our public school graduates went on to higher education. That's the all-time high, and we want to build upon that number. The accountability and the authority that mayoral control creates allows for real change to happen and happen quickly, and we cannot return to the days when there was a lack of accountability and there was a chaos that blocked progress. Second, I want to turn to $300 million in cuts and cost shifts to education funding in the governor's executive budget. The school aid proposal leaves the city $148 million short of the funding we need to cover the increase in state-mandated services, including payments to charter schools and special education services. That's exacerbated by a funding formula that is not equitable. It would require us to send 75% of our foundation aid increased to just 20% of city schools. That would force us to backfill or reduce funding for the remaining 80% of our schools. I want you to know our administration already invests 21.3% more in students in our highest poverty schools, as the statistics we submitted in July in the state school funding transparency form illustrate. We have raised the fair student funding levels for all schools to an average of 93%, with the neediest schools at 100%, and we will continue to emphasize reaching schools that were too long ignored. I urge you to take the next step so that we can help our children more and to allocate the $1.2 billion that city students are owed under the Campaign for Fiscal Equity settlement. That alone could cover the city's fair student funding formula for every school. We'd be able to take every school to 100%. Third issue, the MTA, New York City residents agree it is time to fix the state-run Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and it needs to be this year in this budget, I strongly believe. Now, we know we all would like to see a clearer accounting of MTA capital expenditures and what money they need when, but in the meantime, we also know that tens of billions of dollars will be needed on a sustainable basis. This is the moment to achieve that. Obviously, I support the millionaire's tax, but I know there are other solutions that have been put forward. I urge you to consider all options, but what's most important is that we come up with sustainable revenue to fix the MTA once and for all. I must make clear that that revenue cannot be gathered from the city budget directly. City government should not fund a state responsibility, and we simply can't. The impact on our capital budget would be devastating, potentially damaging our credit rating and imperiling basic infrastructure like schools, parks, roads and bridges, water and sewer that our constituents, all of your constituents, depend on. This is where our capital money is going, and if we had to pay MTA expenses, we could not make these investments. If congestion pricing is an option, I've been clear that I believe strongly it should consider and include hardship exemptions. Revenue should be put in a lockbox for subways and buses, and there should be clear, dedicated investment in transit deserts. Further, New York City must be included in developing and implementing any type of congestion pricing scheme. The executive budget proposal cuts New York City out entirely from the implementation, giving control of city streets to the MTA. And this will not work, and any situation like this would not work without full partnership between local government and state government. I would say that's true in every jurisdiction in the state. Fourth point, there are other worrying cuts and cost shifts in this budget that must be addressed. I've already spoken about $300 million in education cuts. There's another $300 million that would hurt New York City residents in a variety of ways. I urge you to restore the following. The governor is proposing a shift of $125 million of state costs to the city for TANF financial assistance for families in need. This would shift the cost of cash assistance to the city and cut shelter rates for those who need shelter. The state also proposes a $59 million cut in health services, such as help for mothers and children, including newborn home visiting, clinics that treat STDs, HIV, and tuberculosis, response to communicable diseases, including Legionnaire's, West Nile, and Zika, and testing updated vaccines for diseases like measles and hepatitis A. There's also a $13 million cut to preventive services that help keep 5,000 young people a year out of foster care and detention. Fifth item, it's time for the state of New York to join us in supporting our 400,000 public housing residents, and it's time for the state to meet its obligations. The hardworking people in NYCHA are the backbone of our city, and last month we signed an agreement with HUD and the Southern District to put us on a faster path to fixing so many of the problems that plague NYCHA. The city will be investing $2.2 billion over the next decade on top of the $4 billion we had previously committed through our own budget process. Now the state must release the $450 million in funding that all of you agreed to with the governor, and we need that money to get to NYCHA so NYCHA can continue the work needed to improve the lives of our residents. Finally, very quickly on a few other issues, design build. The 5 boroughs deserve the same benefit that the state now has for itself. Our agencies like DOT, DEP, DDC, Parks, H&H, and NYCHA need broad design build authority. This will save money, save time. It's in the taxpayer's interest, and it comes at no cost to the state. On criminal justice, we are addressing the issue of mass incarceration in New York City. We're driving down our jail population. We plan to close Rikers Island, but we need further reform. The state can do so much to encourage speedy trials and reform the discovery process. We believe in those initiatives. We also believe that the governor's proposal on eliminating cash bail is a good start, and it includes something that I've been advocating for, allowing judges to take public safety into account during pretrial detention hearings. There's more work to be done. We have to make sure that we achieve the right balance between safety and reform. Also support the parole reform championed by Assemblymember Mosley and Senator Benjamin. Let's ensure that people who have violated parole and are a risk to the community are incarcerated, but those charged with minor or technical violations are not. We also need the state to move state-supervised parole violators in city jails into available space in state correctional facilities. And finally, we ask for legislative change to allow city prisoners serving less than a year to earn reduced sentences for good behavior, as they do in state institutions. On housing, there are too many landlords still trying to game the system and put hardworking people out of their apartments. Strongly support reform and preferential rent so it lasts for the life of the tenancy. Strongly support the end of vacancy control, the elimination of the vacancy bonus and limits on MCI and IAI increases. Also want to express support strongly for the Kruger-Hevesy home stability support legislation. On marijuana, legalization absolutely is the right thing to do, but it must be done in a way that protects health and safety and does not create a new corporatization of a new industry that causes the same problems we saw with the tobacco industry and the pharmaceutical industry. So I ask that we focus on ensuring that economic benefits from marijuana legalization reach the communities that so long have suffered, and we not repeat the mistakes that have occurred with other agencies. On safety on our roadways, we are doing everything we can to protect New Yorkers. Our Vision Zero strategy is working. Two crucial items before the legislature. On school speed cameras, we support the idea strongly of expansion and see in the governor's proposal to extend and expand city school zone cameras a good start, but we need more zones and longer hours of operation. We look forward to working with the legislature to create a stronger, better program. One further point, revenues from this program should be used to keep our kids safe and not fund the MTA. We have to make sure that the speed cameras are there for safety and we have the resources to have them in the school zones that need them. On red light cameras, also strongly support proposals in the executive budget to extend authorization for the city's red light camera program to stop speeding, but we ask that the legislature expand it to 300 intersections. We also, final point on this matter, strongly support lifting the cap on the number of bus lanes with automated enforcement so we can speed our buses. Finally, very important matter on Civil Rights Law 50A, the need for reform. Section 50A is broken and undermines the trust we have built between our police officers and our communities. I know Commissioner O'Neill feels this strongly, and Commissioner Bratton before him felt this strongly as well. We need to work together to tear down the barriers created by this outdated law and give the public the transparency and accountability that they deserve. Also want to note two last points. Commercial vacancy tax. We have a number of empty storefronts. It's a growing problem in our neighborhoods. Let's pass a smart, targeted tax to stop landlords from leaving their properties empty, from blighting neighborhoods. Let's make clear to landlords that this is a problem for our communities, and with this tax, hopefully we would encourage landlords to turn their properties over more quickly and ensure that small businesses have an opportunity to rent them at a reasonable level. Final point on health. We are, by all accounts, the richest nation on earth, and yet we have people with preventable health problems who end up in emergency rooms with catastrophic problems and astronomical bills. We have a new initiative, NYC Care, that we will use as part of a plan to guarantee access to health care for 600,000 uninsured New Yorkers. I believe this is going to make a huge difference in the lives of our people. At the same time, I want to work with you to the day that we can have a single-payer system for this whole state and obviously ultimately for this nation. To conclude, I want to thank you for all you do on behalf of the people of the state and the people of our city. We are deeply appreciative for the many, many times that you have provided support for the kind of initiatives that really have improved the lives of New Yorkers. Look forward to a dialogue with you today, and I look forward to working with you to keep our city strong and safe and resilient for the 8.6 million New Yorkers who live there. Thank you so much.
Thank
45
you.
seconds left, Chair.
You got it.
Start off well.
You earn extra points for that.
All right.
I'm not sure dollars, but certainly points. So we're going to go to our Chair of Cities, Assemblyman Braunstein.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us today, Mr. Mayor. The executive proposal would require certain school districts to devote a portion of their 2019-20 foundation aid increase to raise the per pupil allocation for certain schools that the executive has identified as high need but underfunded. How would this impact the city, and how does the city currently allocate funding per pupil?
So, although, and I'll say at the outset, I will, in the vast majority of cases, answer the question or start to answer the question, but my two colleagues may jump in any time to fill in additional blanks. Although I'm certain the proposal is well-intended, there are real problems with it. Unfortunately, it has an unequitable impact on a number of schools, because what really happens is it takes away our ability to keep funding a number of our schools, including schools with real needs, at the current level. That would put us in a situation where we would either have to find resources to backfill for those schools and continue their current level of support, or, God forbid, not be able to do that, and then those schools would end up being hurt by the proposal. We're looking for situations where we help all schools simultaneously. Obviously, I believe the single most powerful way to do that is by funding the CFE decision. But the approach we've taken with often great help from the legislature, is to keep raising the fair student funding levels. We're now at an average of 93% for the city. Our goal is to get to 100% for every single school. We believe we can do that in just a few years with your help. That's the equitable way, not to take away from a school. Many schools, as you know, have struggled to improve. We don't want to set them back and then give to another school that's also struggling. We want to lift all schools up. So that's the vision that we would have. But the practical impact is, unfortunately, it would endanger the funding that some schools currently depend on.
Yeah, and I share those concerns. As you know, with the property tax system in the city of New York, generally, wealthy homeowners pay lower effective property tax rates than lower income New Yorkers. To address this, you propose a commission, you put together a commission to make recommendations for changes to the New York City property tax system. Is there a timeline on when we can see those recommendations?
Yes, those recommendations will be put forward this calendar year. Our hope is as soon as possible. The question that now faces us is what package is necessary, what will have to be approved by the state legislature, what would have to be approved by the city council. Do they all have to happen simultaneously? Could they be delinked? That's what the commission is working through right now. As you know, there's some extraordinary people on that commission who really know a lot about state and city government. But the goal is to have all that wrapped up this calendar year.
Okay. And as you know, it's going to be a challenge, whatever they propose. And I look forward to working with you to finally fixing our broken property tax system.
I appreciate it very much, and we are confident that we can come up with ideas that are workable and create more equity. I share your concern. We don't want to see any lack of equity or any lack of transparency.
In the interim, I would also just want to voice my support for the city council's proposal that they put forth last year for a property tax rebate for homeowners with income $150,000 and below. That's just a statement. It's just And then my final question is you expressed support for Senator Krueger and Assemblymember Hevesey's home stability support proposal. Do you have an estimate, if we were to pass that, on what impact it would have on the homelessness numbers in the city of New York?
I'll start and turn to my colleagues. We think this would be a major step forward in allowing us to access a host of apartments we can't right now on behalf of people who need a chance to turn their lives around. I want to emphasize very quickly that the goal when folks go into shelter is to, as quickly as possible, get them back on their feet. And more people in shelter in New York City are working people or people who have worked recently. They're folks who the problem is an economic one. It is not a mental health challenge. It's not a substance abuse challenge. It's simply that they could not make ends meet with rising costs and wages that have not increased as much. So it's really important for us to have as many options to find them good housing as possible, and this legislation would greatly help that effort. Would you like to add?
I would just add that currently the state, under our existing rental subsidy program, does not allow us to pay the most recent fair market rent as per HUD's regulations. And so that means that we're not able to access a certain amount of apartments because we're not able to pay a higher level of rent. What this would do is allow us to access those apartments and therefore move out many more families than we currently do. And that is a very good thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been joined by Assemblyman Dan Steck and Assemblyman Walter Mosley since we began Senate.
And we've been joined by Senator Anna Kaplan and Senator Bob Antonucci. And just looking around, I saw a few others come and go, so they'll probably bop back. But our first questioner is Senator Robert Jackson, Chair of the Cities Department Committee.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So, Mayor de Blasio, welcome. And this is my first time up in Albany as a member of the State Senate, and so I'm so happy to be here in order to support not only New York City, but all of the cities and municipalities that are here to ask for help. So there's a perception out there that New York City has all of the money that it needs. So it's like a tree. You just shake the tree and it comes off. And people feel that why should we shift money from upstate to downstate? Do you hear that? Is that true? What's your opinion? Does New York City have all the funds it needs to carry out its mandates and all of the things we need to do?
Senator, no, we do not. The city of New York, I want to first say, has been consistently having to find additional savings over the years. It's why we've had a partial hiring freeze now for several years. We've had a very aggressive savings plan that has achieved billions of dollars in savings. We just announced, again, a $750 million additional savings plan that we must implement in the next 2 months, and that will include requiring every city agency to make cuts. And we're very, very concerned about the state of the economy, and we're very concerned about the effect of the proposed cuts in the governor's budget. When I tell you that we're already having to find $750 million in cuts, that's without taking into account what the governor has proposed, because we were not going to obviously treat that as a final decision until the legislature has spoken. But that would cause us to have to turn back to those same agencies and say, now we have to find up to $600 million more. That's going to mean program cuts. That's going to mean a lot of jobs will not be filled when they, by attrition, when city positions open up, we will not be able to fill them. So there are real tangible consequences. I would only say that I'm someone who believes that we are all in this together in this state. New York City is 43% of the state's population. Of all the states in America, this is the city with the highest percentage of its state's population. We believe it is our responsibility to support and work with our colleagues all over the state. We are proud to be an economic engine. We're proud to provide a lot of revenue to the state government. I think that's all fair. But I think there has to be fairness as a two-way street. And Campaign for Fiscal Equity, which I think you know a thing or two about, is the most obvious example. I thank you for your leadership, and I know you share the frustration that I feel. We talked about it back in our city council days, that this still has not been realized, even though our children deserve that support, and we would be able to give every school 100% fair student funding. But here's another example. We can't do it right now.
So I wanted to ask you some questions about that. But first, I'm looking at the executive budget impact on cities, and there's a list of all of the cities that are receiving aid to municipality, and I don't see New York City listed. Why isn't New York City listed, and how much impact does that have on our city?
Well, I'll start, and I think my colleagues know the specifics of the history better, but I remember vividly in the previous administration when I think an unfortunate decision was made here to not continue that support for New York City, and I think that's also an example of something that I don't think was consistent, because again, it left us with additional obligations we had to somehow meet. Senator, it's very important to recognize, as we may be facing down an economic challenge, I think everyone is very sober. Obviously, we heard what the governor and comptroller said about the state budget's recent shortfalls. And we see dangerous storm clouds in the overall economy. If there were a recession in 2019 or 2020, all of us will be thrown back. The state would see cuts from the federal government. The state would see cuts in its own revenue. The state would not be able to help the city in that crisis. It's quite clear. And the city would have to somehow keep services like police and fire and education going, even as we would potentially hemorrhage billions and billions of dollars more. I remind people that we're the level of government at the city level that has no choice but to somehow make do. We are legally required to have a balanced budget. Federal government, state government obviously has more flexibility. But Senator, I would only urge recognition that we lost that aid to municipalities, and that's hurt us for a long time, and it's another reason why if we suffered an economic crisis, we would have less to fall back on than we did in the past.
I believe that when it was cut from New York City, the commitment was made that it would be restored the next year, and that commitment never occurred. And at that time, we were losing about $300 million
Correct.
A year. How much would we now be losing if, in fact, we were currently having? Would it be 450, 500 million? What? You have any idea?
I believe there's a cumulative impact to that, and I will ask my team to get back to me.
Okay, very good. So let me ask you about, obviously, I know, unless you're going to tell me you do agree, our governor said, and I'm going to say it every time because it's devastating, he said that CFE, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, was a ghost of the past and a distraction to the present. Do you believe that that lawsuit is a distraction to the president as far as the education of our children?
Senator, with deep respect for the governor, couldn't disagree more. The CFE lawsuit is alive. It is a part of the facts on the ground in this state. It was decided by the highest court in New York State. It was never revoked, nor was it ever fulfilled. The obligations, as you know better than anyone, were fulfilled temporarily and then suspended. We should all be outraged that something that was decided by our highest court to help our children in cities that needed help and in areas of the state and rural areas as well that needed help somehow has not been brought to full fruition, and the effect is obvious. I know every single member here would like to see all of our schools at 100% fair student funding. I hear it from a lot of elected leaders and community people. We would do that in a heartbeat if we had the resources that the CFE decision by the Court of Appeals dictated. It should have been done then. It should still be done now. It is something that must be honored.
And Mayor, I want to ask you a couple more questions, and time is getting short. But you talked about an extension of mayoral control. I don't believe in control. Control is not what I believe in. I believe in authority with oversight at appropriate level. And so I can give you the example. You know the example where we only had a chancellor that was in there for 3 months.
Yes.
And we don't want that type of control to occur.
Right.
So I don't believe in control. I believe if we're going to do anything, we need to come up with a framework of authority with oversight at the appropriate level. Are you willing to participate in that?
Senator, obviously I want to work with you and with your colleagues on a plan that makes sense for the future. I would say to you, we have seen extraordinary impact from mayoral control in terms of serving our kids. But I hear you, you and I have talked about this. The phrase might be better called mayoral accountability, for example. There's other words you could use. The power of it is everyone here and all the parents in New York City get to hold me accountable. That was not true in the past, and there was a lot of dysfunction, a lot of missed opportunities to serve our kids. The high graduation rate, the high college readiness that we see now is directly related to the fact there was that accountability. So absolutely ready to work with people to see ways that we can make everything work better. But the central concept of that accountability and that ability for the mayor to move the system forward and be held accountable, we have to maintain that whatever we do.
Thank you. I want to ask a question my colleague asked me to ask. So last year, your state budget included a provision requiring you to submit your school budget allocation to DOB and SED. And so was it done and was it approved? That's one question. And part of that same question is, did the city do its own analysis of that data? And were there any findings on equity or the lack thereof?
Thank you. I'll let my colleagues speak to that.
Sure.
So we did submit the form, and it was approved, and that allowed us to receive our school aid increase. In terms of any findings on equity, is that the question?
Yes.
DOE did do an analysis of the data that was submitted, and what they found was, as the mayor stated in his testimony, we provide 21.3% more funding to our highest poverty schools, determined by the free and reduced price lunch measure. Additionally, they found that we provide more per pupil funding to schools with the majority of Black and Latino students.
I would just add that that is in addition to all the targeted investments that we've made in high-needs districts, including renewal schools, community schools. We made an investment in 3K. We're now in the top 10 high poverty needs districts.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to ask another question before my time is up.
Please.
We'll follow up. But do you support red light cameras in all schools in New York City?
Yes.
Okay. And what about increasing the numbers of red light cameras, not in schools, but overall?
My central concern is around the schools for our children. As I said in the testimony, we think that there are other intersections where just for Vision Zero purposes, safety purposes, they should be, so we want that number increased to 300. But in terms of the schools, we have seen fatalities go down, injuries go down, crashes go down where the speed cameras were around schools. It seems to me, I know we all care about our children. If we have a proven way of protecting our children, we should be applying that every place it's needed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly.
We go to Assemblyman Thiel, Chair of Local Governments.
I'm sorry, we've also been joined by Senator Sanders. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. I have a question really on the revenue side. You mentioned in your testimony that you're projecting $1 billion less than was collected last year. You also referenced the news that we got a few days ago on the state level of 2.8 million less a projection based on December numbers. I guess my question for you, as you prepare your budget and as we try to prepare ours, how are you factoring in that news? Are you looking at that like it was caused by one-time factors, as kind of a blip on the radar screen as we try to project what our revenues are going to be for the coming year? Or are you looking at it as more of the canary in the coal mine, where this is we may be looking at very difficult times down the road? And it makes a difference, I think, as we try to project, our revenue estimates for a budget this year.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Yes, we believe this is a time where there should be a lot of concern. I think the canary in the coal mine reference is a good one. What we saw in December was shocking to us. We thought things were moving along pretty well in the economy and in the stock market and revenue. And then in December, you had the worst stock market month since the Great Recession, the single worst month in 10 years. There's been obviously some rebound. That's encouraging, but it's not comforting, if you will. So we believe we have to be very cautious. I want to say of our budget director and her team, they have historically been known as very cautious in their estimates, and they thought they were being, and they were very surprised by December. So we are preparing even more cautious estimates, because there's a lot of volatility in the economy in general, and then obviously a number of ups and downs, let's say, in Washington that could affect trade policy, being an obvious one, that could affect the economy in unpredictable ways.
No, I would just add, this is exactly why the mayor has asked me to develop a PEG program, and in the coming months, we must find $750 million in savings in our budget.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senate.
Thank you. Senator Brian Benjamin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I want to agree with you wholeheartedly on parole reform. I think it's desperately needed in the state of New York. Quick question for you. If we were to pass the bill that you referenced, that Assemblymember Mosey and I carry, how much time do you think that could take off closing Rikers Island, in your view?
I'll see if my colleagues have an exact time estimate. I would say I think it's a tremendously important and helpful piece of legislation. And the way we look at it is, if you combine the different pieces, your legislation and the other speedy trial legislation, bail reform done the right way, et cetera, I think we have the chance of taking several years off the process of closing Rikers Island. We'll try and give you more exact information and follow-up, but I think it's a fair ground rule to say that several years could come off our plan if the whole package were put together and voted on.
Sure. One thing you did not mention in your testimony was Amazon, so I have two questions for you on that. First, if you had to do it all over again, would you have followed a different process on this Amazon sort of situation? I'll leave it at that. And secondly, in addition to that, are there other sites that you were looking at or considering in case, for example, this Long Island City site cannot work for whatever reason?
Yes, there were a variety of sites. I think it became very clear during the process that the company preferred the Long Island City site. And obviously that's an area that has been developing, and there is an opportunity to develop more for the kinds of things we care about. We care about more jobs for New Yorkers. We care about creating more affordable housing. We care about fixing our infrastructure. This is a part of the city that's very important to the future of the city. But I want to emphasize this to your question. I think it's a very important one. As I looked at this situation, one of the biggest companies on earth offering the opportunity to bring 25,000 to 40,000 jobs. This was a national competition. Do I think it should be structured that way? No. If I had my druthers, it should not be city competing with city, state competing with state. But I was at a gathering and heard a very powerful point from a former mayor, Senator Bernie Sanders, who said, if we're really going to solve that problem, that requires national legislation to stop that situation where companies can try and set city against city. That said, we had a real-life choice to make. And I think that 25,000 to 40,000 new jobs, many of them good-paying, higher-level jobs that New Yorkers really, really want, that, by the way, are available to a wide range of New Yorkers. Half the jobs in the tech sector are available to folks who don't have a four-year degree. We want to build up our tech community so everyday New Yorkers have jobs. People live in public housing, CUNY graduates. So to me, it was mission critical that this city get those jobs rather than the other cities that I thought were very, very well situated. And to finish the answer, no, we believed that at a very careful tracking of the competition, that there were several other cities poised to win.
Fair enough.
And that we had to strike the right balance.
So you had to do it this way. Got it. A couple of other quick questions. Number one, you've been doing these parent empowerment listening tours with
Yes.
the commissioner. Can you talk a little bit about what have you learned from these tours and from these forums, and has it been good in your opinion?
It's been fantastic. Chancellor Carranza has a very strong view related to parent empowerment. We decided together that we needed to do something more, and this is something we will do on a continuous basis. Meeting directly with the leaders of our community education councils, meeting with PTA presidents. We've now done several borough meetings. We will continue to do them. The feedback's been extraordinary, both in terms of some things that people believe in. They obviously believe in pre-K and 3K and AP for all and a lot of our big initiatives, but also in things that we can do better. And that if we deepen our connection with parents, we're going to figure out a way to do things better. I want to thank you. A great example, when we were dealing with the Wadley campus, the involvement with you and other elected officials and community leaders helped us find a better solution than that which was originally conceptualized by the DOE. We want to do that on a regular basis. So it's been very, very helpful.
One last quick question. Now, one of the things that I care a lot about is the engagement of parents for the DOE with school closures, consolidations. Are there any changes that you believe you can make as we're looking at mayoral control to deal with sort of how parents can engage when it comes to school closures and consolidations, et cetera?
The answer is yes, but I want to preface consistently, as I did with Senator Jackson, we have to maintain accountability, and we have to maintain a system of decision-making that allows us to keep making rapid progress for our schools. But that said, I am certain there are reforms that we can find together that will amplify the parent voice and help us do a better job.
Thank you.
Thank you,
have to
Mr.
cut
Mayor.
off Senator Benjamin. Thank you. Assembly.
Thank you. Since we began, we've been joined by Assemblyman Pat Burke, Assemblywoman Tremaine Wright, and Assemblywoman Pat Fahey, and we go to Assemblyman Charles Fall for a question.
Senator Jamal Bailey has also snuck in. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Charles.
Chair. Good morning.
Make sure your mic is on.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning.
Before I get into my questions, I do want to thank you for including Fastbury and St. George in my district.
Yes.
All the roads that you repaved, and also Universal Pre-K, which has had a tremendous impact on a lot of kids in our district. We, of course, got word a couple of weeks ago that there's going to be a homeless shelter placed in our district.
Yes.
And, this is the same area that's part of the Bay Street rezoning. And there's been a lot of community engagement during the Bay Street rezoning, but there was no mention of the homeless shelter. And some folks in the community are a little frustrated with that. And, folks are trying to understand, is there a way we can perhaps use the vacant NYCHA properties or HPD properties to place those folks that are in need, and perhaps use the funding for that shelter for another Cromwell, because there is a significant need for community centers, and I think the community would greatly appreciate it.
Assembly member, I appreciate the question. And first of all, I want to say the rezoning is an opportunity for us to really make some major investments in the community, things that have been desired for a long time. Cromwell Center is a great example. We have a lot of work to do to figure out the exact plan, but here's an opportunity to do something really big that will help the people of your district and all of Staten Island. So I think by definition that rezoning is a time to look at a whole host of investments. So it's not an either or with the homeless center, homeless shelter, I want to say that. But I've also been very clear that every part of the city needs to have capacity for the folks who come from that part of the city. The history is not good. Folks from Staten Island were sent to Queens, were sent to the Bronx when they were in shelter. That was not going to help them get back on their feet. There's about 1,000 Staten Islanders in our shelter system. Folks from Staten Island should be sheltered on Staten Island on their way back to a different life, a better life, and getting out of shelter. So we think that site can work, and we'll put a lot of resources and energy into making it work, but we're always wanting to have a dialogue about alternative sites, either for other needs or if for anything comes up that proves to us the alternative site is superior. That's ongoing dialogue we've had very productively with a lot of elected officials. But I made a commitment to the people of the city. By the way, before my reelection, I said we were going to open 90 facilities. We were going to change our approach to homelessness so that it was much more borough-based and neighborhood-based. I'm following through on that. That's why this shelter has been proposed. But we're always ready to have a dialogue.
Thank you. In terms of the New York Will, it's not happening anymore. Does the city have any plans for this space? And it's also important to note that this is a section in my district that doesn't have much open space. So, you know, perhaps City Park, State Park would be nice here. But has there been any discussion?
We are very open, and we want to work with you and other community leaders. Look, the wheel, unfortunately, was not coming together. But in the glass half full category, you know, obviously the outlets are moving, and I think that's going to be a big boost to the Staten Island economy. But now we have a major parcel of land to make decisions on together for the future, and I think the question is what's going to help Staten Islanders the most, what's going to fuel the economy, what's going to create jobs. We should look at all that. Everything's on the table. We do not have a specific proposal yet. We want to engage you and your colleagues on that.
Gotcha, thank you. And lastly, bus rapid transit. Of course, folks in the community are looking for a BRT.
Yes.
And I know there are certain areas where we could work very closely with the city on, so I look forward to working with you and your team.
We're committed to one. You know there's some real logistical challenges, but we want to get it done. It's in our plan for select bus service expansion, and we are hopeful we'll find a way.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Senate.
Thank you. Senator John Liu.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Senator.
Just a quick follow-up to Assemblymember Fall's question about the homeless shelters and the budget. I mean, it is a really large piece of the New York City budget nowadays, isn't it?
Yes.
And how much of that do you think goes towards actually sheltering people as opposed to administrative costs, social services, et cetera?
I'll let my colleagues speak to some of the breakout. I would only say at the outset, there's been a real effort to try and make sense of the shelter system going forward, getting out of the cluster sites, which were not appropriate housing, getting out of the hotels, which as a former controller, are too expensive, and we have a plan to leave them once and for all. That's why we want purpose-built shelters. Also, one of the things we're doing that is working and is a good use of money is getting people off the streets who are permanent homeless. Unfortunately, that does put people in shelter. There are costs.
Great,
So
Mr. Mayor, I mean, just really roughly speaking, are we talking about 50% of the homeless shelter, the Department of Homeless Services budget? Does 50% go towards actually sheltering people? Does 25%? Is it more like 75%? Real rough numbers.
Let's have our budget director start.
So the total budget's about $2.1 billion. Excuse me, $860 million is for non-sheltering services.
Okay, so a little more than half is actually directed towards sheltering people. And there are roughly, what's the count now, about 40,000, 35,000 being sheltered?
In shelter, it's about 61.
61,000?
Yes.
Okay. And now, I mean, just for the record, and this is something I'd like to follow up with your office about. You're proposing many new shelters across the city, one of which happens to be in College Point, $9 million a year for 200 beds. That comes to about $45,000 per person. Is that in line with the costs that the city provides all over the city?
We can get you the breakout on that unless the budget director has it handy. But I will say, clearly, we want to no longer have to engage private landlords, which is the least cost efficient, obviously
But
hotels,
this
least
isn't-
cost efficient.
You are engaging a new landlord for this. I mean, this is not yet in place. You're looking to put this in place at a cost of $9 million for 200 beds every single year. $45,000 per bed.
Let me check our facts and make sure we get back to you. I'm only
Great.
making the point that we know there's been a history of high costs. We think having a purpose-built shelter system will eventually lower those costs.
All
But
right.
let's get you the facts that you're asking.
This is not just high cost, it's exorbitant, perhaps obscene. But I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you because earlier in January, actually on my birthday, you made a great announcement. You were going to provide health care for 600,000 fellow New Yorkers who don't have insurance. And the bill for that would be about $100 million a year. That is phenomenal. That is genius. How did you do it? Because if that's the case, we could probably cover everybody in the state of New York for just over $1 billion.
Senator, it is something that took a long time to work through. The question had been on the table for years. Was there some variation on single payer that could be achieved at the local level? The answer was we looked at some very interesting examples in both Los Angeles and San Francisco, but they were both very good but more limited. We asked the question, how can we get truly universal? The X factor here is that we have such a strong public health system and that it covers so much ground in this city, 80-plus facilities, and also that the public health system has made huge strides in the last few years. It is now not only solvent, but it has a surplus. It's much more effective, much more modern. That was really what opened the door. And then the recognition that if we gave people a direct access to care through the NYC Care Card, and that particularly is for 300,000 undocumented folks, that would mean people going to a primary care doctor instead of an emergency room, avoiding long-term hospitalizations, which are extraordinarily costly. So it really was looking at the central problem and asking ourselves, if we turn things around, would we save a lot of money in the end, and could we use the things we have better? And the answer was yes.
And just to add on that point about H&H and their financial solvency, when we launched the transformation plan several years ago, our goal was really to make sure that they're in a positive cash position at the end of the year.
Healthcare costs right now for all New York City employees are several $billion a year. Right now, you're able to get insurance for these 600,000 uninsured people for $150 a pop, $150 a year.
That is
That
the
is phenomenal.
cost.
And I hope we can do that for everybody else as well.
To be clear, that's the incremental cost, right? There are additional costs that are built into health and hospital system.
Well,
so this additional 100 million is incremental.
The 600,000 uninsured New Yorkers that you claim are also incremental. So it's an incremental $150 per person that did not have insurance before. I mean, I think what I'm trying to get at, I am not intentionally trying to drip with sarcasm here. It's important that you get the details out about this because it will help inform our decisions as to, right now,
Yes.
we're grappling with how to deal with the healthcare issue in New York State.
Thank you.
Thank
I have
you.
to cut
Thank
off,
you.
Senator.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been joined by Assemblyman Ortiz and now to Assemblywoman Malliotakis for question.
Thank you, Mayor.
We meet again.
So you're saying that we're going to have $1 billion less in income tax revenue, yet the city budget continues to increase. So this year's budget was $4 billion increase over the previous year, and now you're proposing an additional
I'm sorry, not
$3 billion
$3 billion. Yeah,
increase.
thank you. $3 billion increase.
In addition to the $4 billion from last year. So altogether, the city budget has gone up roughly 30% since you've taken office, about $23 billion in additional costs. So if we are anticipating all these problems with less revenue coming into the city, why do you continue to increase the budget dramatically? And we know we have to fund our schools, we know we need public safety, we know we need to invest in infrastructure. I'm talking about all the other stuff that we're spending money on. Case in point, what my colleague from the Senate just pointed out, the free health care program, which half of it is going to individuals who are citizens of other countries. Yes, they reside in New York, but they're here legally, and we're going to give them free health care. But in addition to that, the half-price Metro cards, talking about the chief democracy officer, the nightlife office, your 314 special assistants, which I always like to talk about. All these costs add up, and it's putting a tremendous amount of burden on the constituents that I represent that are homeowners. The property taxes are out of control. They're out of control. 44% increase in the property tax levy in just 5 years. And you always come here and you say, well, we haven't increased the property tax rate, and that is accurate. I say, I agree with you on that. But what you do, and what the city council does, is increase the property tax levy, which is the amount of money you're seeking in total from property tax payers. And you've done that by 44%. 5%, 6%, 7%, or 8% every year since you've been in office, while every other municipality in the state has a 2% cap on their levy. And I've asked you before, can we freeze the levy? You said no. Can we at least cap the levy? Because it's having an enormous impact on the people that I represent and so many others that are in the outer boroughs that are, you know, in the more poor communities, the working class, the middle class, those homeowners who are trying to achieve the American dream, they can't keep up with this rapid increase every single year. So once again, I'm going to ask you, will you please consider capping the levy while we have the Property Tax Commission look at the disparity that allows for someone in my district that has a property value that's half of what your property is, pay 3 times as much in property taxes. That is unfair, and I appreciate the commission looking at this, but we got to do something to cap the levy in the meantime.
Assemblymember, we disagree on the specific solution, but like you, I listen to my many constituents who are homeowners, and the commission is not just looking at this issue. The commission is going to come forward with solutions, and we're going to bring them here. We're going to bring them to the city council. We need a more equitable system. But I do want to note that looking at, I don't have specific details for any one district, but I would surmise that when you look at the things we've invested in, and you look at your own district, one of the biggest things we've invested in is fairness to our workforce. You know, when I came into office, municipal workers had not seen an increase in their pay for quite a while. They were all not under contract. We have kept them under contract. We've gone through another round of putting them under contract. That's, when you look at the increase, a very substantial amount of the increase in the budget comes from giving municipal workers decent contracts. I know a lot of them live in your district, and I think they would all agree that's a high priority. Another big piece of this is education services. Special education costs have gone up a lot because they were artificially kept low in the previous administration because it was very hard for special ed parents to get the services they need. So just to answer your question real quick, the things that we're investing in, I think, are critical to the future of New York City, and I think they're having a very big impact in outer borough districts like your own. And I don't think, if you said to everyday New Yorkers, would you like us to take back the pre-K or the 3K or the special education support? I know people would say to me, well, wait, no, would you like us to take back the repaving? No, they'd say we need those things. They're important for our quality of life. They're important for our future. I think the investments have worked, but we do need more equity in property tax, and we intend to achieve it.
Well,
I just
thank
want to
you.
add,
Well,
Mayor.
no, hold on, excuse me, because I only have 30 seconds left, and I
Yeah.
just want to get this, and then you have all the time in the world to answer. Okay, so we have a disagreement, because there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we could clearly not be spending money on in the city of New York, and I'd be happy to talk to you about that another time. I just want to go to one more thing, because 2 years ago at this very hearing, we talked about the issue of sanctuary cities. And at the time, I said that, you know, I take exception to the fact that we're protecting individuals, certain crimes that are not on your list: grand larceny, sex abuse, patronizing a child for prostitution, welfare fraud, identity theft, some other crimes.
So
You said you were going to have your attorneys look into that. Have you done so? And
Yes.
do you have any comment on what has occurred in Queens with the MS-13 gang member who's here illegally, and there were 2 individuals, one is now murdered? Do you have any comment on that? And
Yeah.
thank you.
Mayor.
Thank you.
I would say the NYPD is doing extraordinary work to fight gangs, and the NYPD has been very clear about a number of gangs that it's dealing with. MS-13 is something we look at and take seriously. There are other gangs that are much more established here that are the ones we have to particularly put our focus on. I have total faith in the NYPD to address the gang issue, to continue to make the city safer. On the question of the way the NYPD and every other agency in New York City respects folks who live here and happen to be undocumented, Commissioner O'Neill feels adamantly that we are protecting public safety by not asking people documentation status. When the
question was
federal
on the
government,
lawyers. The
I'm
lawyers. Have the
answering the
lawyers looked
question,
into
but I'm
it?
Assemblywoman,
prefacing.
let the mayor answer. We have to move on.
The federal government attempted to hold back security funding over this issue, and a federal court found that that was inappropriate. So our security funding continues, our policies that keep New Yorkers safe continue, and our police commissioner and his predecessors believe these are the right policies. On the question of the legislation of the City Council, as you know, 170 specific crimes by the vote of the City Council, and I signed the bill, indicate when there's a conviction in those cases that we do cooperate fully with ICE. We have had the law department review other areas of concern. We are having that conversation with the City Council right now to determine the course of action.
Thank you. Senate?
Senator, we've been joined by Senator Kevin Thomas, and our next questioner is Senator Jim Seward.
Good afternoon, Mayor. I wanted to return to a discussion on the MTA and specifically on the subway action plan. Are you seeing any positive results of the subway action plan thus far?
Senator, we finally got a report from the MTA recently, which we're evaluating now. I think the goal of regular reporting and clear results has not yet been met, is the honest answer. I'm going to remain hopeful, but I would like to see going forward more accountability, more transparency, more results for the money that we put in.
When the subway action plan came about and in last year's state budget, it called for a 50-50 split, city and state, funding it. Will the city ever agree to contribute to the subway action plan? And if not, why not?
Senator, obviously the legislature made that choice last time. I've tried to say very consistently, we think it's a dangerous concept going forward. We believe the only way to address the MTA issue is to determine an ongoing sustainable revenue source. The very reason, Senator, is that right now, if you look at our capital budget, we have been trying our best to repave a lot of the streets in New York City. We still have huge problems. We've been trying to create the new school space we need. I think a lot of my colleagues from the 5 boroughs would say they want to see more and faster. We have a lot of overcrowded schools. We've been trying to create more affordable housing in a city that's become more expensive. You go down the list, we have huge needs, and we can't meet them with our current capital budget. There's a host of resiliency needs, obviously, as a coastal city with what we're facing in our climate. So the problem with the formulation of the 50-50 is it creates an open-ended situation where clearly our ability to spend on the things that are solely our responsibility, public safety, education, parks, sanitation, you go down the list, environmental protection, that's all the city's responsibility, period. We would not be able to keep up our commitments if there was a 50-50 split structure. We would have to take away from a number of areas that our people depend on. I think the better solution is to put together whatever package of funding solutions. It could be from the internet tax, it could be from the marijuana tax. Obviously, I believe in a millionaire's tax. Others believe in congestion pricing. A state bond act for transportation is another option. Whatever combination the legislature feels comfortable with, that protects the long-term future of the MTA without undermining the services that are keeping New York City going.
You described your budget presentation last week as being a sobering report. And I wanted to just zero in on the level of workforce in the city. It's my understanding that it's at the highest level since the 1975 fiscal crisis. An increase of some 30,000 employees. Has the city's workforce grown too much? Is there a possibility of layoffs? Should our New York City Police Department be concerned about cuts and layoffs there?
There's no plan for layoffs, Senator. In fact, of all the increases in personnel that we have focused on, the 2,000 more police officers on our streets was one of, I think, the best decisions we made in the last 5 years. It helped us drive down crime. It helped us achieve neighborhood policing and improve the relationship between police and community. We've added pre-K and 3K teachers, which has helped to really change our educational system for the better and support parents who needed that service provided for free. I think more special ed teachers, more sanitation workers to make the city cleaner. I feel good about those choices. We can get to the exact history of which level of employment the city had when. I think that would be valuable to share. If we have it, we'll offer it, or I'll get to you right after. But Senator, I think the central point is no layoffs, but as I've made clear, we do have a partial hiring freeze, so that means that open jobs in many cases are not being filled. Vacancies are being taken back by the budget office. When there's attrition, we're now saying there'll have to be a decision with each agency whether a job that opens up through attrition will be filled or will be canceled. So it's not layoffs, but it is the kind of actions that will lead to reductions in personnel.
And finally, in the few seconds we have left, if congestion pricing comes about, and you mentioned you wanted to see some hardship provisions in there, would you consider a waiver here or hardship? Our upstate farmers who bring their produce into the city, for farmers markets, and in some of those parts of the city that don't have fresh vegetables. There's a lot of concern in terms of our upstate farmers having to pay this congestion pricing.
I think that's a good example because we value those green markets, and we're particularly trying to get them to communities that don't have enough fresh produce. So that's a great example of something where there might be an important carve-out to make because we're trying to achieve another goal. We don't want to contradict that goal. I think another great example, Senator, is obviously so many of our hospitals, so many of the greatest hospitals around are in that particular area that would be the zone where you'd have to pay more to enter under a congestion pricing vision. I'm concerned about working people, everyday people, who can't afford the constant additional cost if they have to go to the hospital frequently. And that's the case for a lot of folks, including a lot of seniors and a lot of folks with disabilities or chronic diseases. I think there's a way to address that. But I think if we failed to address it, we'd be creating a really unfair hardship.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly.
So a while ago, we were joined by Assemblyman Ortiz, Assemblyman Weprin, Assemblywoman Rosick, and Assemblywoman Fernandez just walked in. I saw her. We're going to go to Assemblyman Schmidt.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Afternoon.
Since rent regulation is coming up for renewal this year, can you tell me approximately how much of every rent dollar a tenant in a Class 2 apartment building pays in rent goes to pay property taxes?
I wish I had that handy. Let's see if the budget director does. No, we can get that to you today, though.
I would appreciate that. My understanding is between 30 and 40%, an increase over the last 15 years was about 18%, but I'd love to confirm that with your team. Recently, you stated there is plenty of money in the world, plenty of money in the city. It is just in the wrong hands. You also stated on CNN that, quote, the 1% has rigged the system, have created policies that, quote, huge windfalls to corporations and the wealthy, and we need policies that give back to working people, unquote. Knowing that the rest of New York has not seen the same level of economic strength and recovery from the Great Recession that New York City has experienced, and that you negotiated with the governor the largest taxpayer-funded incentive package in the history of the state for Amazon, which is one of the richest companies in the history of the world. Given the recent comments of yours that I've mentioned, are you still supportive of taking billions of dollars in taxpayer money from upstate residents, money that can be used for upstate job growth, tax relief across the state, and critical infrastructure improvements, money that can improve many lives, in my opinion, to assist this wealthy corporation, or is this just a kind of a talking point-based shift?
Assembly member, I think it's the reality. I spoke about it earlier, that we have a dynamic in this country where if a corporation is talking about that number of jobs, and we've never had a single plan, a single agreement that brought us that many jobs at once. That's just a pure historical fact. 25,000 to 40,000 jobs is a seismic impact. Clearly there was a competition. I think the rules of engagement should be different in the future, but these are the rules we had. The incentives that the company had access to overwhelmingly were because of state law that any company would have had access to under the same conditions, going into Queens and bringing new jobs. So I think what's important to recognize here is you're talking about a 9-to-1 impact, $9 in revenue for every dollar spent in incentives. which by any measure will help the people of the city and the whole state. If we know that much revenue is coming back, by definition, it's in the taxpayers' interest. So we have more work to do going forward to make sure that Amazon lives up to all of its commitments, make sure the jobs go to people who need it in the 5 boroughs, make sure that they become good neighbors and invest in our city. But the fundamental notion of that many jobs and that much tax revenue, I'd say very clearly to all New Yorkers, we would rather have that in our city than lose that.
Thank you. Also in regards to HQ2 and the anticipated population growth in the area, how will New York City protect the increased population in that area? Do you plan on reopening Engine 261 in Long Island City?
We're going to look at that. I'm someone, I will say very squarely, Assembly Member, I'm not going to make a blanket commitment at this moment because it's something we have to evaluate, but I will say that I was deeply involved in the effort to stop a number of firehouse closures when I was a council member. And when I came into office, I said one thing we would not do is the additional closures that the previous administration had tried to engineer, and we stopped it, and there have been all firehouses open since. It stands to reason that when there's new areas of growth in our city, we need to evaluate whether our fire and emergency service is sufficient or whether we need to do more. So we will be doing that. And remind you that even in the build out with Amazon, it's 10 to 15 years building out all those jobs. So there is some time to make that evaluation, but we will take it very seriously.
Expanding on that question, maybe it's the same answer, but FDNY has had its busiest year in history this year. And then do you have any plans on opening a newer fire company in the Hudson Yards area with the approximately 100,000 people that is estimated to also be coming to that area?
Very fair question. Same answer. We are going to look at that. That's obviously a whole area of change in our city. We need to make sure the fire and EMS service is sufficient, so we're looking at that right now.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senate.
Thank you. I just want to reference that Assembly member's father is an FDNY member, who I know very well. That's where that question came from.
There you go. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you. Next on the list is Senator Jim Gorin.
Mr. Mayor, how are you? Good to see you. Thank you for coming here. It's nice to meet you finally.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Getting back to the MTA, you support the millionaire's tax, which I understand. There are some of us in the Senate who do not.
Yes.
Because, quite frankly, we're worried about what appears to be a declining economy, the impact of the president's SALT deductions, really, which is a property tax increase, as you know, for states like New York. We're very concerned that that additional tax could lead to more people leaving the state and a loss of revenue to the entire state. So on the assumption we don't pass the millionaire's tax, I'm sure you might support congestion pricing. Is that fair to say?
Senator, I've said that I have not yet seen a plan I could support, but I remain open to new versions. I've raised some of the concerns that I have: need for a lockbox, need for specific help in the outer boroughs and transit deserts, a need for hardship exemptions. Very open to discussion. But just one quick response before hearing the rest of your question. I do want to note our analysis so far by our budget office is that the tax plan that the President and the Congress voted on, I agree with you, did a huge disservice to this state and others by eliminating SALT. I believe there will be a strong effort in a few years to get that exemption back, which we deserve. That plan can be repealed, and we should get the SALT exemption back. But I also would note we believe a number of millionaires and billionaires actually net gained in that legislation in New York because of the lower tax rates that they also experienced. And I remind you, the plan we put forward, I understand there's real concern about it, but it was only to tax millionaires and billionaires in the 5 boroughs, not beyond.
I understand that, but I believe that it would also impact the rest of the state and revenue. Well, I actually agree with you on the concept that I have not seen a congestion pricing plan that I can support. And one of the concerns I have as a senator representing part of the North Shore of Long Island is that I want to make sure that if this fee goes into effect, when my constituents go back and forth to the city, whether it's for work, whether it's to go to Broadway, whether it's to go visit people, that they're getting some, their money back for paying this additional fee. And that's why I'm concerned about your saying that this money has to go into a lockbox for subways and buses, which I presume you're just talking about New York City buses. What about the Long Island Railroad? Many of my constituents are now driving into Manhattan because of the very poor declining service of the Long Island Railroad. And also some of our local communities, towns and villages, are spending a fortune in rebuilding parking facilities. And some of that has to do with the fact that for years, electrification doesn't go further east. And so communities like mine are inundated with more structures and cars. So I guess my question for you is that if you end up supporting congestion pricing, would you support the concept of it being used on a regional basis, including supporting such things as upgrading the Long Island Railroad and buses for Long Island, where we really have no north-south buses. And if you don't have a car, you sometimes just can't get to work.
Senator, I want to say, in a spirit of real unity, I think all over the state, folks are struggling to get the transit they need. And I think it's only fair that we all regard each other's problems respectfully and say we want solutions for everyone. What's good for Long Island is good for New York City. What's good for New York City is good for Long Island. If your communities are working better, it helps us and vice versa. So, of course, the legislature is going to look at this issue. It's a complex issue, and we're ready to engage any conversation that helps us get there. When I say lockbox, I'm only emphasizing the point that one of the central reasons, of course, to have a congestion pricing plan would be to try and help our subways and buses recover. They're obviously in a really tough situation. And I think it's fair to say, Senator, that a lot of your constituents also, if they come into work, for example, a lot of them will take a subway or bus too, or even if they're coming in for other reasons. So I think it's fair to say that our transit system benefits people in the entire metropolitan area. But there's lots of ways to do this. We have to make sure in the end that we all come to a feeling, whatever combination of revenue streams, that's actually enough to put the MTA on a reasonable footing going forward, and that we can have reliable subway and bus service in New York City, in addition to whatever else might be looked at. Because if we don't have reliable subway and bus service in New York City, the entire metropolitan area will suffer.
Well, right now we have a very unreliable Long Island Railroad as well, and I am really concerned about this proposal because I have not seen the regional aspect to it, and I hope you would support that congestion pricing money being used to solve our regional problem.
Certainly want to work with you, Senator.
And just quickly, Mr. Mayor, one final question to follow up on Senator Seward in terms of hardships for congestion pricing. I have a lot of constituents who own small businesses. They drive small vans. They go into Manhattan all the time. Would that be something that you could support an exemption for?
Again, as you and I both start this discussion, at this point we haven't seen a plan we could support, but I remain open to the discussion. I think when it comes to hardship, I gave the example that I see the most and I hear the most of folks from other parts of the 5 boroughs who need medical care. I think Senator Seward's example is a good one. I think your example is a good one so long as we have some ground rules that are fair. We say, what defines small business, for example? We want to be sensitive to a real mom and pop operation. Other businesses might have more resources. But I'd be very open to any discussion that we all end up feeling is fair. When I talk about the outer borough dynamics, for example, when Mayor Bloomberg presented his congestion plan, there were no guarantees for the communities I represented in Brooklyn. And we all knew that Brooklyn and Queens would be the first 2 places to feel the impact. Obviously, Long Island would as well. So I wanted to make sure that people knew there was fairness in the plan. I can hear that in your question as well. I'm open to whatever gets us there, and I think it's a productive dialogue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. We go to Assemblyman Carroll.
My assembly member, honored to see you.
Good afternoon, Mayor de Blasio. So let me first start where I agree with you before I get into where I disagree with you. First, I agree with you that whatever MTA funding we do, we cannot put a burden on the city to pay half the capital cost. We need to come up with a solution that raises the capital dollars for the entire region here in Albany. As you know, and this is where I'm going to get where I disagree with you, as you know, the MTA is facing a $1.6 billion deficit in 2022. The suggestions, to be perfectly blunt, I think it is disingenuous to say that you would support a congestion pricing plan and then talk about the number of carve-outs that you've suggested today, because we know that at the end of the day, with those carve-outs, we will end up not raising nearly enough revenue. With a traditional congestion pricing plan that charges around $5.76 for folks crossing the East River bridges or 60th Street, we'd raise about $1 billion. We would still need at least an additional $600 million to really fully fund a 5-year capital plan that includes the Fast Forward plan, as well as make sure we fulfill all the other obligations that the MTA owes. So how do you plan in a legislature that clearly is not looking to raise taxes on millionaires and congestion pricing being the only viable option, to come here and say, yes, I may support congestion pricing, but I want a number of carve-outs that will reduce the total revenue of that, and we will not get anywhere near the amount of revenue we need by 2022. And as you know, congestion pricing will, take 20% of CO2 emissions from cars out of the air. It will make our streets more safe. How is this not the progressive plan for right now? This is what moves 6 million New Yorkers every day who are disproportionately lower income than those folks who drive into Manhattan every day and park.
Well, Assemblymember, look, I appreciate your honesty. I would disagree with you respectfully. I don't think it's disingenuous in the least. I'm someone who has had real concerns about the different plans that put forward. I understand the hopes that people have associated with those plans, and there's some very commendable elements. If we really do have a plan that reduces congestion, helps the MTA, addresses in some way global warming, those are all very important elements. But the concerns I've raised are real and tangible. I do not agree that you can't have some valid carve-outs. I just don't. I don't think they have to debilitate the funding stream. I think it's a balance point. I think there's a way to figure out what is a fair hardship exemption and what is not. What does it do to our revenue? What revenue we need? I also believe firmly...
Well, we know what revenue we need, respectfully, Mr. Mayor. We know that we need to get somewhere to $1.6 billion, and we know that a congestion pricing plan with no carve-outs only gets us $1 billion.
Well,
so where is that hardship cap?
Assemblymember, first of all, I would argue there's a real open question about what amount of money is needed each year in light of what we've seen in terms of real MTA spending and the real concerns that a lot of us have about the efficiency levels of the MTA. I think that's a different question than what grand total we need, but I think there's an objective, fair question. In the coming few years, what amount is needed each year? I do think that's open. But on your bigger point, I also firmly believe there's not going to be one specific plan that covers all of it. I wish that I've heard people say millionaires' tax is not on the table for a lot of people. I respect that. I still think it should be given a look, but let's say you put that aside. What about internet sales tax? What about some portion of marijuana revenue? What about a state transportation bond act? We are going to need some combination to get where we need to go either way.
Mayor de Blasio, I agree with you that there needs to be some combination, but how can we get there when the single largest revenue source, which is congestion pricing, before we even get to that, we have carved it to death where it will not raise nearly enough revenue? What did you think that the progressive plan would be? The plan that's for the environment, the plan that's for safe streets, the plan that's for 6 million New Yorkers who take the buses and subways every single day, to have a full-fledged congestion pricing plan so that we can get the largest amount of revenue for our subways right off the bat, and then figure out how we can get internet sales tax, how we can get taxes on marijuana, how we can get additional revenue.
Respectfully, Assemblymember, I think if I'm asking for real consideration for hardship for working New Yorkers, for example, with chronic
Working New Yorkers
conditions.
take the subway, Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry.
Working New Yorkers, they
come
do.
on. Assemblymember, respectfully, if a working New Yorker has a chronic medical condition or is disabled, a senior who needs to go to the hospitals in that zone regularly, I'm sorry. There is a valid discussion of a hardship exemption. It does not debilitate the revenue source. I just disagree with you.
Thank you. To the Senate.
Thank you. Senator Ramos. Hello?
There we go. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. I have questions about several topics, so I'm going to try to go through them quickly. I'm going to start with NYCHA. The governor's proposal decreases the housing and community renewal funding by $203 million. One of the factors that has contributed to a $250 million reduction of a one-time investment in NYCHA. What plans do you have in place that could prevent a potential gap in funding?
Senator, we have put forward a very vigorous plan, the NYCHA 2.0 plan, which is all publicly available, to address the now almost $32 billion in physical need at NYCHA. But we're very honest in that plan that we cannot reach the whole total at the current time. We can do a lot with the existing resources that we get from the federal government, with the money that the city continually provides, and we've added $4 billion more previous to this recent settlement with the federal government, another $2.2 billion coming from the settlement. So the city is present and accounted for. Federal government has some skin in the game. They should have a lot more. The fact that the $450 million previously authorized by the state has never reached us is a central problem. We have to resolve that quickly and get that money to NYCHA for heating, for elevators, for addressing lead, et cetera. But the truth to your question is, to finish that gap of that $32 billion figure, there must be new federal funding. I've spoken to Senator Schumer about this repeatedly. He's been very, very supportive. My distinct hope is that starting soon, but particularly after the 2020 elections, we will have an opportunity to get the federal government back in the business of fully funding public housing. That's how we could ultimately turn around NYCHA. We're also doing a lot of, I think, the right things in terms of the RAD program and other efforts to bring in additional outside private resources as well. But the answer is, we must one day see an increase in federal funding if we really want to fix the totality of the problem.
With regard to the federal appointed monitor, have you received a short list of candidates that are being considered?
Yes.
Can you share any?
Out of respect for the Justice Department, I don't think that would be appropriate right now, but there has been, I think, very open communication, respectful communication, and I feel that the process is moving in a good direction.
But since you'll have input as to the selection of the federal monitor, can you talk to us about what you're looking for in terms of criteria?
Yes, I think what we've seen with the other federal monitors we've had in New York City in the last few years. We have a federal monitor right now at the NYPD on the stop and frisk case. It's been a very productive, constructive relationship to make change but do it in a collegial fashion. The same at the Corrections Department, the same at NYCHA in terms of the mold issue. So there's 3 examples that are working. We'd like to see that kind of approach emulated here. The idea is to move the Housing Authority forward, to change some of the things that needed change, but also to respect there's a lot of people, hardworking people there every day trying to make the place better. And we need to be smart about the balance, how we proceed. And I think a monitor who wants to work with existing leadership constructively is the best way, that's the best model for getting things done.
Thank you. A few questions on Amazon. In your negotiations with Amazon, Mr. Mayor, did you ask them if their workers would have the right to unionize or collectively bargain?
We made clear that at the site, because the negotiation, of course, was over the headquarters site, the agreement was construction would be done by union workers, building services on the site would be provided by union workers. That was the extent of the negotiation because it was relevant to the site that was being discussed in the deal.
You've characterized the Amazon deal as good for New York, one reason being because it will bring in revenue to the city to help pay for things like the expansion of healthcare. Have you explored ways to pay for necessities like healthcare without giving out billion-dollar tax breaks to corporations? Wouldn't it be more progressive to ask corporations to pay taxes at a time when the city needs more revenue instead?
I do believe corporations should pay more taxes. And the fact is, if the city of New York had the power to determine taxation levels, we'd be doing that right now. That power rests here and it rests in Washington. Unfortunately, in Washington, they went in the opposite direction and gave a huge tax break to the wealthy and corporations in the tax bill. So I would welcome the opportunity for us to levy higher taxes on corporations. But in this particular construct that we were dealing with, Senator, I am aware of the fact that the City of New York, what we do with healthcare, education, affordable housing, there's a lot we do for people. We think it's the right thing to do. We need consistent revenue to do that. We believe we will get it from this particular plan. Also, Senator, Amazon asked us for additional and specific tailor-made incentives. We refused. We said we're not doing that anymore in New York City. The incentives they got were through existing state incentive programs that any company could access. I've said very openly, if the legislature decides that those programs should be changed going forward, I think that's a commendable discussion. And the state made some specific choices related to that as well. But the City of New York did not offer any additional incentives, period. Everything was pre-existent.
Thank you. Assembly.
Assemblywoman Nolan.
Thank you. Just want to start out, so often these hearings are about areas we have concerns. Just want to quickly highlight on a personal level, in the last 2 weeks, both a member of my family and a neighbor used the city's EMT service, and I could never say enough about the compassion and the dedication of the men and women of that branch of our city's uniformed services and paramedics, EMTs, and just outstanding, and the service that they give. And sometimes we forget to say that thank you when we have these hearings. We focus on the glass half empty, but it's someone who's feeling very happy about the health of some of my nearest and dearest. I feel very good about that.
Thank you, Assemblymember.
And we're going to thank them
Appreciate
because
that.
they were wonderful. I just want to quickly, the proposal, the executive's proposal for school aid, you talked a little bit about it earlier. I'd like you to say again, I know it came up at the Ed hearing, as to some of the inadequacies and also your concerns about the language that the executive has put in. And I want to phrase it in the context of last year. Last year we were asked, and we finally did, after much arm wrestling, come up with some criteria, and you had to supply the division of the budget with an endless stream of information. I'm curious, A, if they ever got back to anybody with what they did with all that information, and B, as I understand it, some of the groups that look at these things, Ed Trust and others, have shown that you spend more, you, Mayor de Blasio, your DOE is spending more on poorer schools by maybe 10, 15% more than schools with, children that have a little more at home. So I don't really know why we're looking at more language this year. I have a lot of concerns about it, and I'd like you to address that. And then also, I always ask about the trailers, but we were successful in the fall, thanks to your wonderful team of Simonia and others on your team, finally getting that money out of that commission that we had, and I think it's about $300 million, and I would like an update, because even having asked that question for 20 years at these hearings, there are still thousands of New York City students going to school in trailers. So I'd like a comment on that as well.
Yes, and Assemblymember, I want to thank you because you have been the leader on this issue and helped to keep everyone's focus on it, and that's good because that accountability has resulted.
And we got the money to take care of it for you, so I hope you're going to do it. But
well,
if you can
I
get
gotta
me an
tell
answer
you,
on that and on the
yes,
fair student funding.
That this is a good use of the phrase, the end is near. So the end is near. I asked actually in a budget meeting the other day, and my colleagues will fill in the specifics, but right now, trailers are being removed steadily. There is an end date for the entire city, for all 5 boroughs, the day there will not be a single trailer left. And that is, again, thanks to you and your colleagues for that focus. I'll just finish the rest of the question and turn to my colleagues to answer everything else outstanding. Very quickly, you are correct that our investments in schools in greatest need has been steadily increasing over time. It's over a 20% increase, I noted earlier in my testimony. And that is because it's not just the increases we made in fair student funding. It is pre-K, 3K community schools, it's AP for all, it's after-school programs, there's a host of things that we've invested in that have disproportionately helped schools in greatest need. That's the whole story. On your question about the reporting, I have not heard of a particular follow-up. My colleagues can speak to it better than I, but I will say simply we duly provided the reporting. The reporting showed how much we had shifted resources to the schools in need. I'm not aware of a particular dialogue or follow-up that happened from that. And I share your concern that although we always want to be transparent, the goal here is not reporting and adding more and more reporting just for its own sake. The goal is to help us be efficient and effective and serve kids, and there's a balance point that has to be struck. Want to add, either one of you?
Just on the trailers, to your first question, we had 354 at the beginning of the administration. 198 have been removed. We have 65 plans for removal. There's about 91 left that we're still working on identifying space. In our 2015-2019 SCA capital plan, $395 million has been budgeted. And then in our proposed...
For the removal of
That's
trailers.
correct. And then for the proposed, for 2020 through 24, it's $230 million.
Okay. Thank you. We'll follow up with you about the specifics. I appreciate the emphasis. Just quickly, I represent the district in Long Island City that the Amazon project is part of. It has my support, but I want to urge you to reopen the firehouse, to get your economic development people out there into our community. I think they've done a great job. I have a lot of respect for Jim Patchett and the work they've done, but they are not out there. They're not a community agency type of agency. We need to get out there and explain to people what's happening so that the firehouse can come back and other good things can happen.
Thank you. We will follow up on that for sure.
Thank you. Senator Diane Savino.
Thank you, Senator Krueger. Good morning, Mayor. It's afternoon now, I think.
All right, afternoon it is. Good afternoon, Senator.
So first, let me just say, when I agree with you, I agree with you, and there's a few things I agree with you on in your testimony. I share your concern about the cuts to New York City social service programs, particularly foster care preventive services, and the continuing unfair treatment towards the city with respect to raise the age. And I've registered those complaints with the administration. But I need you to help me on something, because I was here when we settled, I think we settled the campaign for fiscal equity, and the former Governor Eliot Spitzer adopted the foundation aid formula. And I'm not an expert on education funding, I'll be honest. But I'm somewhat confused, because I know we thought we were going to implement it, then we had to slow it down because of the financial collapse of 2008 and 9 and 10, which continued. But we have increased education funding each year, and now we're almost $300 million more to New York City in this year's budget, but you're saying that we're getting $300 million less. So help me understand that.
Yes, and I appreciate the question. Thank you very much, by the way, for your leadership on the social service issue, because it's absolutely crucial to get that money restored. To your question, so the first problem with the proposal this year is the way the money is specifically channeled. Unfortunately creates a winners and losers situation that we'd like to avoid. We would, our goal, and we did it in part with city funds last year, is to keep raising that fair student funding formula to 100% for all schools. We're at 93% average now. Again, another example where the end is near. We're in striking range within a few years of 100% for every single school. But the reality of the governor's proposal is that it would specifically take money from some schools and give them to other schools. We don't think that's the smarter, equitable way to improve and support schools that need more help by taking away from other schools. That's the functional reality that would occur here. The other facts, Senator, are obviously, look, the cost of running such a large school system have continually gone up. The labor contracts we feel good about. We made it a point to actually have labor contracts. The previous administration did not. That's one way they may have spent less money. We've been under mandate for special ed that we believe is fair, and we've actually been living up to it and spending that money. For example, money that we are mandated to spend and sometimes we have disagreements on is the charter mandate, but that's something we've had to put a lot of money out for. So when you add all up, our costs have continued to increase, but so have the results that you would rightfully demand. The graduation rate continues to go up, test scores going up, college readiness, college acceptance. And the big core investments, and your district has been an area that's seen a lot of this, the pre-K and 3K, have gone to a lot of places that really were not getting enough and have been very powerful additions. So I would argue that the problem here is high quality education costs a lot of money. You can be as efficient as you want, but it still costs a lot of money. And it had to start a lot earlier anyway, if we were really serious about it. And that's what we've been acting on. But if we took campaign for fiscal equity and said, okay, law is a law, and it was followed through on, that would, in one fell swoop, every school would be brought to 100% fair student funding.
So it's just in the 1.5 minutes I have left. So it's not necessarily the dollar amount the city's getting, it's the direction that you're being told
Correct.
that you have to use it in. So in the final minute I have, let me just say, I agree with my colleagues with respect to the issue of property taxes. As an aggrieved New York City property taxpayer, the burden is getting higher. And I understand the Byzantine nature of the New York City property tax system. It's going to require the city and the state to work together, and I think we need to do something about it. And with respect to congestion pricing, I don't like the plan that's being presented right now. I do think we need to do something. I think, though, that there was a proposal that came out a year or so ago, the Move New York plan. I sponsored it in the Senate along with some of my other colleagues and some members of the Assembly. That's a much fairer system because it doesn't create winners and losers. It puts tolls on every bridge at a manageable rate, and everyone is in and everybody gets something, all 13 counties of the system. And I think it's something that we should look at because we heard last week from the MTA, they have a tremendous operating budget deficit as well as a capital deficit. So this congestion pricing proposal isn't going to solve both of those problems. And I represent people, as you know, on Staten Island, some of whom, and by the way, thank you for the fast ferries. We appreciate it, but many of our constituents have to, take multiple methods of work, of transportation to get to where they're going. And Assemblyman Carroll, not everybody who drives to work is rich. Some people have no choice. And we would like some, opportunities in the parts of the city that need it. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Senator.
Assembly.
Assemblywoman Wright.
Good afternoon, Mayor.
Good afternoon.
Is it on? Yes. Okay, I have questions about a number of different things. I do share the concerns with the congestion pricing. Almost everyone in my community goes to get their health care in Manhattan, so that's one of the concerns we definitely have. But as we talk about congestion pricing, that doesn't really deal with congestion, that's about money. But we do have some real concerns about congestion in my community. And I would like to know what portion of your budget is dedicated to trench repair?
To trench repair? I cannot tell a lie. I have not heard that specific phrase before. Trench repair. Do you happen to know, Director?
It's the streets that are sinking in because no budget, no allocation in the city budget has been made, except I think last year was the first year in about 15 years to address the problem.
I may be used to it by a
streets.
different name, but we definitely need to deal with sinking streets. I'm going to say sinking streets because that's what I've heard.
Okay, so it's sinking streets.
We must address that issue. I don't know if we have the number offhand and we need to get back.
We would have to get back.
Assembly member, we will get that to you today. But obviously, look, it is consistent with the vision we put forward on repaving streets, is also obviously repairing situations like that. With major part of our capital expenditures now are to fix streets in general. That's not just because of Vision Zero, which we believe in too, but it's because a lot of our streets need to be fixed to be functional. So that's a big piece of our budget now, and that's part of what we're concerned about here to protect.
So if they can get back to me with the streets that you're going to fix this coming year?
We can do that.
Because last year, when we have over 10 streets that are actually sinking in, only one block was actually on the list to be repaired.
We can get you today the total dollar figure and which streets in your community are going to be addressed.
And then also, I would like to know, how much money has the city collected from the fines levied by the Office of Special Enforcement that goes around and fine people for short-term rentals? And how many have come out of the zip codes of 11221, 16, 33, and 13?
We can get you that too.
And if you can, just at this time, tell us how much you've collected in fees from the Office of Special Enforcement fines. Do you have that number?
Yeah, the overall number? Do you have that handy? We will get that today.
So, and I just have to say at this moment, white members of my community are followed home from the train station by your Office of Special Enforcement. It is a problem. It is not fair. It's discriminatory. The practice needs to stop.
I just want to say, because it's a major concern, I can hear in your voice.
It is.
I have not heard the specifics, and I'd like to hear them from you as quickly as we can arrange, because that would deeply concern me.
Okay.
But it's the first time I'm hearing that, and I want to take it very seriously.
Okay. And I'd also like to know what percentage of the education budget is actually dedicated and used to pay for either performing and fine arts programs or after-school programs in K-8 schools?
Let me start, and if, again, you're asking very important and precise questions, we want to make sure we give you exact answers, so if my colleagues have them, they'll say it now, but I want to make one overview point. When I came into office, we specifically mandated ongoing funding for arts and culture programs in schools, because that had been an area, I think you know, that had been cut back a lot, and we put additional recurring funding in for those programs, but I don't know the percentages within the budget.
We don't know the percentages, but we'll get back to you shortly on
So
that.
I've been
I just
asking for
wanna-
this number for 6 months already.
I was
and
not
I
aware
haven't
that you were,
gotten
but
it.
we will get it to you.
Well,
And I'd also like to know,
I'm sorry, I want to say I apologize for that, because that's the thing that's the kind of thing we can get you in a day or two, and it should have happened already, so we'll make sure that's fixed.
I just want to also add, when we respond to you and give you the after-school, we're going to add in programs for the Department of Youth and Community Development, which
nope,
also
I just want to know
partner with
DOE
schools.
budget. I don't want to know what Department of Youth Services is doing. I want to know what the DOE is paying for, because not one of the schools, I have a district where not one of my schools has any DOE dollars going directly to art, any fine arts, performing arts, or after-school programs, according to my principals, and so I find that particularly problematic. This is also the same school district that had no middle school foreign language, and they just got some last year. So I
There
have a
should
lot of
not be a
problems with
school
the
that has
distribution.
I just want to clarify, there should not be a school with no arts and culture funding. They
That's
might,
funded by directly by DOE, not that they can't go out and find a grant.
no, I'm saying there should not be one that has none, and I want to examine, I'm concerned about that. So let us quickly find out, do you know what, was that middle school, elementary school?
K through 8.
K through
So
8.
go through K through
We'll
8.
get you an
Yeah.
answer on that.
And so obviously we have a lot of concern about schools in my district. I only have one more second. I have to say, I know that this is probably not the best place, but I have to lodge a complaint with Assessor Ride. I do need you to give some more attention to it and how it's being administered. Thank you.
We are fundamentally dissatisfied with Accessoride. It is under the control of the MTA and therefore under the control of the state government, but we have been trying to work with them on a new system for residents who can use vehicles other than the full vans, to use a host of other for-hire vehicles to speed things up. But no, that system has been broken for a long time. I'm very frustrated with it, but that has to be part of the other changes we'd all like to see in the MTA.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Sanders.
How are you holding up, Mr. Mayor?
Quite well, sir. Thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I want to
I feel like it's a reunion going on here for all of us who are in the city council.
Well, this is the city council section, so they put us in
It's a reunion.
place. I want to thank you for keeping me on your MWBE task force. We're doing a lot of good work. You're doing a lot of good work there. We have a long way to go, but you're doing a lot of good work there in moving this city. I want to alert you that as the chair of banking, I'm very interested in the city's use of its money, how it can deal with the issues of economic justice and development by a skillful putting some of its monies in banks of color. I've looked into the law and found that there's no fiduciary responsibilities that you can do it. Make a long story short. We will speak of that later. I wanted to say that I'm very concerned, of course, about NYCHA, having a lot of NYCHA in my district, and transportation, but we can speak of these things later. I want to tell you about the Board of Ed. I think it was silly and backwards that you were only given a one-year extension last time, and it was just a vengeful thing, and I was against it then, and I certainly am in favor of an extension. May I remind you, however, that New York City is the only city that doesn't have, in New York State, that doesn't have a school board. And although there may have been problems with the school boards in days gone by, the problems of democracy are only solved by more and responsible democracy. We just don't say there was a problem, let's get rid of it, we won't have it. A true parent's voice on a school board may be a worthy thing. And since you have a lot of questions and you've given me access to yourself and your administration, I look forward to discussing these things at another time, and I would, if I can, give my time to RJ, Robert Jackson, so that he could speak more on his.
We don't
I
give
can't?
time around that way,
Oh,
sorry.
well, I tried, Robert.
It was very generous.
Well, I tried.
But Senator, to just quick response to your point, absolutely believe that we can continue, and I think your point about deepening democracy is a very, very good one. One, we had this series of discussions recently, the Chancellor and I, with Community Education Council leaders and members. And you and I both were school board members, so we understand what it's like for people to volunteer their time, try and help make their schools better. And I felt very kindred with the folks I was meeting with. But one of the things that they raised was they said, well, there's an individual school concern. How much assurance do we have it gets heard? And I proceeded to list to them some of the individual schools around the city where concerns had come up that had gotten on my radar screen very quickly, certainly got on the Chancellor's radar screen very quickly. And we felt accountable to come up with a solution. So it's a big city, yes, but education is my #1 area of concern. I work very closely with the Chancellor. I think the Chancellor's been extraordinary in his first year on the job. I want to emphasize that the current system of accountability is right down to the school level. I had a caller to WNYC the other day, asked about a specific school and what we were going to do to address it. That same day we got back with an answer. So there is accountability there, but I think in terms of the CECs, there are definitely things we can do to better support the CECs, better engage the CECs and have them have a bigger impact. And I also think we are blessed to have something we did not have in the previous administration, which is a PEP that looks objectively at issues and sometimes says, no, we see it differently. And I still fundamentally, of course, believe in the mayoral accountability construct. I'll take the senator's idea there. But I'll tell you, we have had items that the DOE sent forward to the PEP, that the PEP said, nope, we're sending it back, fix it, bring it back, do it differently. And that was honored and respected, as opposed to what you remember in the previous administration, where dissent was not tolerated. We see the PEP as a good check and balance with the current structure. So we really are trying to give that greater democracy that you believe in. I do too. And I think it's having an effect, but we think there's more we can do.
Let deal in the days to come and bang.
Thank you. Don't even answer that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assembly.
Assemblyman Barkley.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Hello, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for your testimony. I enjoyed listening to it. I had one question about the MTA and particularly about the governance of the MTA. As you're aware, the governor has said he's not necessarily responsible for the MTA's failures because he doesn't control the MTA, which is, I guess, true. He doesn't have a majority on the board, although he does appoint the most members of the MTA board. I haven't heard him say he would want control of the MTA. In fact, I haven't heard anyone come up with a plan of what a better governance system is for the MTA. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think it should be mayoral control? Do you think it should be gubernatorial control or some other hybrid?
Well, I appreciate the question very much. I believe there's an answer for today that is the most central way to answer it. May not be the same answer for the future, but I think it's certainly the answer for today. The governor and his predecessor governors have named the chair of the MTA, have determined the MTA budget. Whatever the official makeup of the board, for many gubernatorial terms now, it's been quite clear the governors in New York State have functionally controlled the MTA. Of late, I've heard the governor say more definitive things about believing that if he had a clear line of authority, that more work could be done better. I think there's truth in that. I liken it to the reality with mayoral accountability for education. I said it's been about 15 years. The graduation rate went from under 50% to now 75%. So that's pretty fast in the scheme of things, and that's an example of what happens when there is actually someone in charge and everyone knows it. So I think the governor's governance proposal broadly is the right direction for the here and now. And we want to make sure it's fair. We want to make sure it's transparent. There's appropriate checks and balances. But I think having one person clearly in control is right. If that works, that's the best way to solve our immediate problems with MTA. If for some reason that doesn't work, there are other options that could be discussed in the future, like a city control. But I think if we're talking about a right now crisis that needs a right now solution, rather than trying an entirely different structure, we should fix the structure we have, get at the revenue it needs. That's our best chance for success.
So I may have missed this. The governor is proposing full control of the MTA?
I'm going to say this as a non-lawyer, forgive me, but I think for all intents and purposes, what he's put forward so far amounts to gubernatorial accountability, gubernatorial control of the MTA in somewhat a similar way as mayoral accountability and control for education.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Senate.
Thank you, Senator Jamal Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Where am I looking? I know he's out there. Oh, okay. How are you, Senator?
Got here late. So I have a litany of questions, and before I ask my questions, I wanted to thank you for expanding the ferry service to the Bronx. It will certainly help ease some of our transportation woes. But the first question that I had for you was concerning 50A reform. I saw that in your testimony that you said that you believe that it's broken and undermines the trust we've built between police officers and communities. I absolutely believe that to be the case. Do you have a position on repeal or outright repeal or reform?
We need to start over, either way you slice it. Either we should take the existing law and say, let's clear the decks, think about all the things we have to achieve and rewrite this from scratch, or there should be a concept of repealing and immediately substituting with a new law. Because the reason I think it's so important to have a law in place is we have to strike a balance between transparency, which is absolutely necessary for our future, and officer safety, which is absolutely crucial, with the bond of trust we have with our officers who protect us, and issues within the criminal justice system about protecting the way in which our officers testify in court and making sure that can be effective. There's a series of needs that can be, I think, accommodated in a balanced way. 50A right now does not do that. It does not achieve the transparency we need. It does not provide the public with confidence they're getting the information they deserve. But if you didn't have some kind of governing rules, you would have other problems in terms of the functioning of the criminal justice system and certainly in terms of protecting officer safety. So I think it's either a fundamental rewrite of the current bill or it's a simultaneous repeal and substitute with a new bill.
Okay, I look forward to working with you in your office on that matter. As you mentioned, criminal justice matters also as well. You've indicated support for bail, speedy trial, and discovery. Have you or your office taken a position on either the executive's proposal or some of the legislation that has been advanced by the legislature relating to pretrial reform?
You mean in terms of the bail reform and all? Yes.
Bail reform, speedy trial, and discovery.
I think the initial proposal from the governor is a step in the right direction because it speaks to both ending cash bail, but also recognizing there are situations where a suspect may prove to be very dangerous to the community. I mean, I have to invoke a tragedy, the loss of Officer Randolph Holder. We lost a good young man serving our city as a police officer. The individual involved, by any common sense standard, the shooter should have been still behind bars, who was a suspect of another crime. But I think we can strike that balance. I think the way it cuts is that for a huge swath of individuals, they are currently held and they should not be. And that's why we should eliminate cash bail. We're talking about nonviolent individuals, folks who did minor crimes. For folks who pose a violent threat, for folks who pose a flight risk, a judge clearly needs the ability to hold that individual and make sure they are not a danger to the community. Right now, judges do not have sufficient power to do so. So in writing this reform, I think we can balance both pieces of that equation.
Okay. I would align myself with some of your thoughts. I agree that we have a tale of two cities, as you've often indicated, and that wealth-based detention is never the key to a fair and just criminal justice system. A question on education. Obviously, you are in favor of continuing mayoral control, but why should you alone be in charge of selecting the chancellor and superintendent?
I believe there's a number of things that we can do across the whole question of mayoral accountability, mayoral control, to, again, improve the role of parents, improve the different voices. But when it comes to the selection of the chancellor, I would say two things. One, I think it's the quintessential example of accountability. I get elected by the voters. I choose a chancellor. I am held accountable every day for what that chancellor does. I think that's the most effective way. I feel very proud of the two chancellors that I have chosen, both educators who have been, I think, exemplary. But also there is a personnel reality that has to be seen in its fullness. The discussions that happened, and some of them became very public this last year, there's no way to get a top-flight educator through a public process. Most top-flight educators, of course, are somewhere serving as a superintendent. They cannot expose themselves to a public selection process, or they wouldn't be able to put their name forward. They would compromise their current employment, and of course no one knows they're going to be chosen until they're chosen. We would undermine our ability to get the very finest leader for our school system if it was a system that did not ultimately involve the choice of the mayor in a discrete personnel process. But there's lots of other ways we can get more input into the type of chancellor we need, ideas about names of people to look at. There's a lot of ways I think we can improve the system while still maintaining, what actually functionally works.
No, thank you for your answer, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your team for always being responsive.
Thank you.
Thank you. We go to Assemblyman Ortiz for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
So good to see you. I have a couple of quick questions, and one has to do regarding the BQE. As you know, the BQE has a 50-block stretch that runs right down to the middle of my district. And it's not only bring traffic and noise pollution, but also I have 14 schools almost on the same stretch next to it, and we're planning to build a school across the street.
You know, Assembly Member, it's my neighboring district. I know it well.
I understand, but just for the record.
Yes.
For the record. And one of the questions that I have is, who is responsible to do quality, to put the quality sensor to measure the air quality of the BQE?
So our Department of Environmental Protection is responsible. I can't speak to the state level. There may be duplication at the state level, but certainly our Department of Environmental Protection is responsible.
Okay. The reason I asked the question is because, it's been an increase of asthma and bronchitis on that section in Sunset Park. And we really would like to get a sense of direction, how high is the emission of the air quality.
And we'll get you the
if it's
recent
possible,
ones.
we can work together on
Yes.
that regard.
Yes.
I also would like to echo the issue of the property taxes. As you probably know, you know the district very well. You did work in the district at some point.
As a school board member.
That is correct. And real property taxes right now really is displacing of those folks who has been saving their money for the entire life. And they don't have enough to pay the property taxes. As a result, they're too high. So they sell in their homes and they leave. I want to be on the record that is something that can be done, something that can be worked out to ensure that we are not allowed those people who have been saving for their entire life to still live in Sunset Park, that they can find a way to really stay and pay their property taxes and keep going in the community. Most of the kids leave the community because they cannot afford it to stay there anymore because of the gentrification. I also would like to reintegrate the issue of NYCHA. First of all, I would like to thank you for the staff that you have in NYCHA. They've been very courageous to pick up my email and my phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning when we don't have heat and hot water, but they've been prompt to respond, and I'm not complaining about that. But we do have still some issues with the heat, with the hot water. We also have issues with the ticketing that we're giving to people that they need to have repairs in their homes. And sometimes the workers go, they say they are not in the homes, they don't come back. So, it has to be some kind of working relationship between tenants and the workers, that when they come to repair the apartment, that they get the ticket in order to repair whether it's the wall, whether it's the LED, whether it is the toilet, whether it is the bathroom. So I will encourage that should be better communication between those two lines. And lastly, I also would like to thank you and the First Lady for continuing to work very hard to ensure that we have mental health and psychologists and providers inside the schools. And on that note, I also would like to know how many social workers has been hired full-time in the school to address the need of the mental health for our children. If you can provide that information to us, that will be great. And lastly, I mentioned to you
Wait,
about.
Can I get that one in? Because I
Yeah,
want to
sure.
make sure, I mean, we will get you the follow-up material, but I appreciate the focus on mental health you're raising. Every school in New York City now has access to mental health professionals. That was not true in the past. A lot of them have on-site mental health professionals in our community schools. We're expanding that approach. So, you know, there's mental health trained professionals, there's social workers, obviously guidance counselors, all these pieces interact. We've been increasing the number of personnel, and we'll get you the facts on that. Also want to say on NYCHA that I appreciate your point. I will tell you the good news is the response time on heating problems is getting rapidly better. Night and day situation compared to last winter, a lot of changes being made. And I've emphasized to the NYCHA leadership that we have to do better customer service. We have to make sure the problems are being addressed, but also there's communication to the residents about what's happening and when the problem is resolved. I think you'll see some major improvements in that, but we want to make sure that NYCHA leadership is talking to you directly about what you've experienced.
Wonderful, because the other issue that I have faced on the school system is that I have been, as you know, I visit the school every Friday, and one of the things that I have experienced is regarding kids with eating disorders. Kids with eating disorders, they sometimes don't have the access, sometimes it's shameful to come out. Sometimes they go to the breakfast, to the lunchroom, but they don't eat, but they don't associate, so nobody really pay attention to how these kids react. So one of the major components on having social workers in place is to address those needs as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've been joined by Assemblywoman Bashad, and to the Senate.
Hi, I think I'm going to take my turn, Mr. Mayor. I always try to let everyone else ask questions, or as many as possible, then we get to avoid my even having to ask too many. Did you mention earlier what your position is on a pied-à-terre tax?
I was not asked.
What is your position on a pied-à-terre tax with the money going to the city of New York?
My position, I want to just make a quick overview and then to the specific. The quick overview is I believe that millionaires and billionaires are not being taxed at a high enough level. My focus right now, of course, is a millionaire's tax to support the MTA. I had previously also proposed something I think would be very high impact, which is a mansion tax to provide affordable housing to over 25,000 senior households. I think that's a pinpointed tax on those who have done very well that would help in particular. Look, depending on what you think the priority is, pied-à-terre tax is consistent with those concepts unquestionably. I would say right now my focus in terms of impact would be on those other two, but I think pied-à-terre tax has a certain clear logic to it.
Thank you. And you referenced in your testimony you were supporting a commercial vacancy tax.
Yes.
To address the so many empty storefronts. I know, speaking for my district or most of Manhattan, landlords are choosing to keep the space empty rather than have a market rate rent because they can take tax loss deductions that get them as much as renting out the space, which is crazy, but it's what's happening. So do you have a specific bill you're proposing for the legislature, or do we have one already?
We are working with members of the legislature. We'd like to see a bill introduced shortly. I agree with you that this is not only a problem of the individual choices of landlords, which I honestly, as someone who served as a city council member and worked closely with people at the community level, it astounds me why a landlord would hold a property off the market, in some cases 2, 3, or more years, rather than taking an acceptable rent level and improving the community at the same time. So I think there's a problem of some landlords' behavior. I might say greed specifically, but there's also, as you indicate, a government policy problem that inadvertently encourages that negative behavior. I think we have to flip the script. I believe there is a specific timeline that we could agree to. Some might say it's 1 year, some might say it's 2 years, whatever the choice is, that would activate this tax as a penalty, and that would therefore right the ship and encourage landlords to get their properties on the market and make them affordable for small businesses.
Somebody else brought up, I thought Senator Savina, who's left, her support for the Move New York plan for congestion pricing, which I also think is superior than the plan that's being floated around. I know you don't per se get a vote. Interestingly, it's not even clear the legislature gets a vote. We had the MTA here for 4 hours, and nobody wanted to answer any questions about the specifics. So I'm suggesting you might want to talk to your 4 members on the MTA board and review why we walked away from a plan where there did seem to be more equity in who was going to be the winners and losers, so to speak. There was something for everybody, and you're hearing today suburban members are very concerned there isn't something for them. So it's not necessarily a question as much as an urging everybody to take a look and go back and revisit that plan, and you actually do have some say on the MTA board through your
There's no question about that. As you say, the ultimate vote is here, but we want to work with all of you. I will say the one thing that to me is immutable truth is the original plan proposed by Mayor Bloomberg was the least appropriate plan, the one that missed the equity issues the most. I think everything we've seen since actually has been an honest attempt to start addressing equity among boroughs and other issues of fairness. So I would say in the bigger scheme of things, the dialogue has improved over the years. I certainly have complimented the folks who did the Move New York proposal. I've complimented the folks on the Governor's Commission who came up with improvements over previous plans. I still think there are outstanding issues, but I'm ready to work with all of you to see what we could do. I would only add that we must have a multiple element package if we ever expect to hit the ongoing renewable dollar figure we need.
I agree, we do need a multiple element plan. And I would urge people to take a look at the proposals of Bobby Carroll that I think came out in one of the papers today, which would tax the delivery from internet sales, delivery per box, I think was the proposal. And also some kind of per day fee on the ride share. So I also want to suggest that those are, I thought at least on initial review, some very interesting new proposals. And finally, I was asked to double check on the insurance plan, well, the coverage for people without insurance that you rolled out. There was a question, actually, that Senator Savino didn't have a chance to ask. Does this not apply to people who live on Staten Island?
It absolutely does. There's two elements. The first is for the 300,000 New Yorkers who are eligible for insurance and unenrolled. This applies to everyone across the 5 boroughs. We have a public option, a Metro Plus, that in the past was not particularly organized for maximum usefulness. Now we have made a series of changes that we think are going to work for people in Staten Island and all 5 boroughs. And we're promoting it differently, we're staffing it differently, 24-hour helpline, much more accessible service, sliding scale fee. We believe this public option is going to work for a lot of those 300,000 people who currently cannot find an acceptable option on the exchange or aren't going on the exchange because they find it too daunting. The other 300,000 folks are undocumented immigrants. Now, we could get you our breakout of where we think they are borough by borough. But the specific fact is we have a clinic on Staten Island that is part of Health and Hospitals. We opened recently the Vanderbilt Clinic. That is the place that can provide this direct service. Also, we know that people go all over because of their work, because of schools, whatever it is, and they can access any of the 80+ facilities that Health and Hospitals has. But again, that piece, it could, in theory, be for anyone, but that piece is particularly pertinent for undocumented folks. That's the NYC Care Card, and we think it will be well used all over the 5 boroughs.
Thank you. I'm going to cede the rest of my time.
Thank you. Assemblyman Weprin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
Good afternoon.
I know it won't surprise you that I'm against this current congestion pricing plan, as I have been with previous congestion pricing plans. And I do appreciate your exploring other revenue sources, because I think we're all in agreement that we need a permanent revenue source for the MTA for their long-term capital needs. But to say that it's this plan or needs, you have to be congestion pricing or nothing else, to me is a mistake. This has been around for many, many years, as you know, more than 10 years, going back to Mayor Bloomberg's plan. I actually think this particular plan that's in the budget is the worst of all, because it gives a blank check to the TBTA, a subsidiary of the MTA, to decide how much the fee should be, when it should be raised, how often, the zone. So, I think it's a very dangerous proposal, and I think it shouldn't be rushed in in the interest of getting something done before the budget. So I do appreciate your bringing up a number of new revenue sources, which I'd like to see explored, such as the internet sales tax, the transportation bond issue, a millionaire's tax, which you've brought up before. I still think, and I know a lot of my colleagues from the suburbs are going to disagree with me, but I still think we should be looking at the non-resident income tax. That's the fairest tax. People that work in New York City but live outside of New York City, who benefit from all the services of New York City, including the MTA, used to be called the commuter tax. Still think that's the fairest tax. So,
Assembly member, if I may just quickly on just 2 points you raised. One, I do believe strongly this can and should be resolved by the budget. It's the best chance, and I think maybe our last best chance to come up with a plan that could be felt in the near term, and the help is needed right away. I agree with you fundamentally that the current congestion pricing proposal in the governor's budget would not be workable in terms of respecting local control. And I think everybody who represents any part of the state should be worried whenever their localities are threatened by the kind of measures that would literally take away control over land use or control over how we manage our streets. When an outside entity can do whatever it wants on our streets, that's a very dangerous situation. So I think structurally there's a big problem. But that said, I do believe that there's a real debate that can be had about how to improve that proposal, but also the other points. The internet sales tax, I think, is very promising. Transportation Bond Act, some portion of the marijuana revenue. I think there is a package to be had, and it can be done by April 1st. I just want to strongly say I think that's what would be best for the people of New York City.
Yeah, I don't disagree. There should be a number of sources. I just don't like this congestion pricing or nothing. The other thing with congestion pricing, as you know and I know, they're two separate issues. There's a revenue issue and a congestion issue. I like your proposals for reducing congestion, changing delivery times. I support that fully. Traffic enforcement with double parked trucks causing major congestion, limiting the amount of new car services, app-based services that are circulating all over Manhattan, like Uber and Lyft, and you're already starting to do that. So those are the issues with congestion. I don't think it should be put together as congestion pricing. I think it should be congestion and revenue for the MTA. I really think it should be two separate issues. And just one other issue, I have about a little over a minute left. As you know, I chair the Corrections Committee. I've been working closely with Steve Banks from your administration about a plan and legislation, which I'm actually, I think, introducing today to deal with inmates being discharged from state correctional facilities that are currently going into homeless shelters in New York City without any kind of direction. And we want to put together a plan in that bill, and I look forward to working with Simonia on getting that legislation through. But I think we put it in today, so if you could look out for it.
Thank you. Assemblymember, I want to, first of all, before responding to that, just thank you very deeply, and all your colleagues, for the work you all did to help us improve our correction system and increase the safety of our system with the body scanners, which is meant to protect our officers and inmates alike. That was a major, major step forward. I want to thank you for your leadership. On this question of the state's responsibility, everyone here I know is concerned about the problem of mass incarceration, and we're all concerned about reentry into society. And yet currently, the state of New York, and this has been true for a long time, simply directs New York City residents back home without any kind of real support plan. There's no clear vision of where they'll get housing, where they'll get a job. It is a formula for disaster, and it's proven that time and time again. We at the city level have a current plan when our inmates in our jail system leave after they have served their time, which is obviously less than 1 year if they're in a city jail. We get them a 90-day transitional job because we want to do the right thing in terms of redemption, but also the taxpayers greatly benefit if we put a little money up front to get someone back on track, and then they can reintegrate into the economy and have a good life. That is also in the taxpayers' interest rather than someone's life falling apart again. But the state has no such methodology, and this is an area we need a lot of help. So I thank you again for your leadership and your colleagues, because if we could get this right, it would reduce homelessness, it would reduce recidivism, it would be a major step forward for our city.
I look forward to working with you on that legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just as a reminder to legislators, because we're getting notes in from Twitter, turn off your mics if you are not the ones talking, because they, for some reason, the system we have, live streaming picks up our little discussions more than we even realize here. So if you're not the one speaking, turn off the mics, because you're popping up in tweets. And next up, Senator Antonacci.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I'm up from upstate New York. I share some constituents with Assemblyman Barkley. So our concern is, as the governor's taking away aid from our municipalities, and I've got one town where $6,000 could mean a big difference in their tax liability. Very concerned about the MTA, and last week the MTA, just was grilled for 5 hours. And I guess it's your testimony as well as your written documents that really the state runs the MTA, and in terms of accountability, that's where it probably begins and ends?
Look, Senator, I think that's been the functional reality. Again, I think the governor has called for clarification of that reality. I think that would be productive, so at least everyone would know where the accountability is.
Okay, and then as far as the New York City Housing Authority, would that be squarely a city function?
This housing authority was chartered by the federal government, and for a long period of time, decades, the funding streams were federal and state. As the state backed away and the federal government reduced, the city has come in more and more. Legally, it is federally chartered, and that's very important. The only reason it exists is because of federal law. And we're trying to make the point that the federal government needs to continue the obligations that the original law intended.
Okay. And I guess I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. There's obviously some overlapping responsibilities here, but when I hear you want to have a bigger expansion of, I call it government-run healthcare, I'm skeptical, but I'll share, the number crunching, just like Senator Lieu. I would love to see the report on that, and I would urge you to get that out sooner rather than later.
And I appreciate that question and Senator Lieu's question. It is, I know it at first blush looks unusual, but I want to say what really occurred to us is we have been hemorrhaging money because we're providing health care the exact wrong way. This is true all over the country, where the family doctor is the emergency room, which is horrendous humanly, but also incredibly inefficient for the taxpayers. When the problem isn't addressed, and it leads to hospitalization and even greater cost when you could have avoided the hospitalization with early care. But also because we have the biggest public health system in America, but it was being underutilized. It was not particularly efficient, to be honest with you. A lot of changes have happened in the last few years that made it fiscally healthier, but it's also opened up the possibility that it could provide a lot more care, including to insured folks, and that's fully half of our plan, is to get that Metro Plus health insurance plan out there in the hands of a lot more people. We really think it nets out favorably, and the amount of additional cost is meaningful, but it's smart in the scheme of things. And finally, we're all in this together. If someone goes to work and the person next to them doesn't have insurance, they're eligible, they don't have insurance, or they're undocumented, we're all breathing the same air, if you will. And a healthier society really does benefit everybody.
Thank you. Also in upstate, a project like Amazon, when we talk about transformational, I mean, what it would do to upstate New York would be unbelievable. There's a lot of consternation down in New York City. I know that you and the governor are on the same page, and the Senate Democrats are, certainly asking questions. Would you make a commitment to all New Yorkers that if somehow Amazon was about to pull the plug, to try to advocate for Amazon to relocate within New York State so that we don't lose that company?
I respect the question, Senator, but I'm not going to bargain against my own city, and I know you'll understand that. We believe that New York City gained 25,000 to 40,000 new jobs, and a tax revenue for the city and the state at a 9-to-1 ratio. Whatever incentives, we're getting $9 back for every dollar incentive. That's good for the city, it's good for the whole state, that's good for all areas of the state, ultimately.
So we're on the same page. We don't want to see Amazon go somewhere else.
Absolutely
we want them in
not.
New York State.
Absolutely not. But I think what we have here is the best way to make this plan work. I'm sure there are ways to improve upon it, but we need it to hold because we need those jobs, we need that revenue. I think that will benefit everyone.
Right. And then last question, marijuana, has your city budget folks done an analysis of the effect of the legalization of marijuana?
We've not done a budgetary analysis. We have done an analysis, and we put out a plan in December, which I'll make sure our team gets to you, looking at the law enforcement ramifications, health, the sort of local jurisdictional governmental questions, legal procedural questions, how to make sure that some of the mistakes that occurred in the tobacco industry and the pharmaceutical industry don't happen again here. We looked at all the other jurisdictions that had legalized to get a sense of what had worked and what had not. And we wanted to offer that to the legislature as something that we hope will be helpful, because we think there is a right way to do it and there's bluntly a very wrong way to do it too.
All right, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly.
So I think I'm the last member of the Assembly to speak. Likewise, as Senator Kruger, I wait for all the members to go and see if there's anything left for me.
I want to commend both chairs for being true egalitarians.
Thank you. So just a follow-up to one of the questions I believe that Councilman Barkley asked about the shortfall in income tax revenues that you addressed during your preliminary budget presentation. You did reference the decline in the stock market as an issue. I was just wondering if there's been a sort of a drill down to see what the cause of this revenue reduction was. As you know, the governor has said that he believes that's a good portion of our state reduction related to the impact of SALT restrictions, either people pushing income forward a year by paying in 17, or hoping for a change and pushing income out. So trying to figure out if this is really a one-year blip or if it is something that we think is a continuing revenue shortfall.
No, I appreciate that question very much. I'll start, and Director Melanie Hartzog will follow through. First of all, we do think the state and the city are experiencing somewhat different realities. And the budget director will go into that. So I think this is a case where the governor's obviously looking at the impact on the whole state in terms of SALT. We're looking at what's happened with city revenue. I think the stock market element was very much what we saw as the driver here in our reduction in revenue. And it was, I would just say bluntly, again, for an Office of Management budget that's conservative by nature, they were thrown for a loop. We were all thrown for a loop by that December situation in the stock market. On the SALT situation, the OMB analysis is, it is a mixed bag in the city and in the state, because there are clearly some wealthy people who net lost in the equation. There are also, we think, more wealthy people who net gained, because even though they lost the SALT deduction, they gained with a lower tax rate on high wealth. So I think it is a mixed situation. The challenge for us is, since we believe the stock market element, and we're obviously the capital of the finance industry in this country, we're particularly sensitive on this point. A lot of those folks live in our city. We believe that's the driver, and we don't know where it's going, because it's dependent on what happens with trade policy. It's dependent on whether there's another shutdown or not. A lot of things out of our control, and there's a tremendous sense of uncertainty. Please.
I would just say our challenge was looking at estimated payments. And so if you asked me in October how collections were coming in for estimated payments, I would have told the mayor at that point in time, right, if I looked from October to forecasting for January, we would have seen hundreds of millions come in. Now that is even with a slowing economy, we would have seen that. As December moved and the volatility in the stock market, which was significant and unprecedented, also as the mayor talked about, come January, we did not see that being the case. And in fact, we had to actually take down revenues to lead to our lower projections. So that's very different from, as I understand, what the state is saying, which it has to do with SALT and the impact of losing higher income earners and filers. We haven't seen that. We haven't experienced that.
Thank you. Then I wanted to ask a couple of questions relating to the executive's plan on congestion tolling, basically without the consent of New York City, and that would allow the TBTA to be exempt from any permit, license, or other approval, including environmental review. So let me just go through the 3 or 4 questions relating to that, and you can respond. What's the practical impact of those provisions? Will they potentially jeopardize public safety? Who would be responsible for accidents in the absence of permits or approvals? And would this give the MTA the authority to close city streets without approval or consent from New York City?
Yeah, all of those concerns are very real, Madam Chair. The fact is that the structural problem here is huge. Now, it's surmountable. I want to be very clear, and I'll speak to that in a moment, but it's a huge problem on its face. You know, recently there was an initiative put forward by, not this year, in previous years, by the governor in terms of the land use powers of the MTA. And the members of the legislature wisely said there's a tremendous danger in extending the MTA's abilities to make land use decisions for localities. It was a policy proposal that actually united big cities, small cities, smaller parts of the state, bigger parts of the state, suburbs, city, everyone together believed that the notion of the MTA dictating land use policy for their local jurisdictions was absolutely inconsistent with local power to decide our own destiny. This is a variation on that, in my view. You're absolutely right. Under this proposal, the MTA would be in a position to close streets without any recourse from the city. We know how logistically difficult everything about New York City is. There would be no requirement that New York City agencies had any involvement or any ability to change the plans. It's a situation that everyone should be concerned about. If you're in a locality outside New York City, you should see this as a very bad precedent, in my view. So what I would argue is, if there's an interest in the legislature in a congestion pricing plan as a part of the package of revenue that we would need for the MTA, then one, we should all talk about what's the fair way to do it, and two, it must involve a partnership with New York City, both to function, but also to be fair and not create a host of unintended consequences.
And in light of the possibility of congestion pricing, has the city been working with the MTA to improve and add bus service to communities like mine that don't have a subway station within their bounds and certainly not accessible subway stations close by?
Yes, and this is, I would say, one, we're going to do this regardless of which revenue package is determined for the MTA. We're expanding select bus service, as I announced in the State of the City. We have a very aggressive plan to quickly, in the next year, increase bus speeds by 25% across the board by doing a lot more enforcement in bus lanes, by synchronizing traffic lights to support and favor buses, a host of things we're going to be doing to try and improve the speed of bus transit, but also to add new lines where they would be most beneficial. But one of the things that I've always seen as a potential positive here, if we could come together on a plan, all of us, and I'll just say I will be available 24/7, Madam Chair, to work with the legislature to get to a plan by April 1st that will fund the MTA, whatever combination of features. But one of the things we could do here is have an agreement that transit deserts in the outer boroughs get specific benefits. I remember when Mayor Bloomberg proposed this plan, I was in the city council, and I pleaded with the administration to specifically address the needs of, in particular, Brooklyn and Queens, and to have a lockbox for their needs that would answer the areas that really were starved for transportation. There was no willingness to do that back then. This administration, even though I've said what my preferences would be, I've also said I'm always ready to work with all of you on a package. If that package includes dedicated funds for outer borough transit deserts, that's something that could actually be a step forward for all of us.
We actually did, in last year's budget, as part of the surcharge on for hire vehicles, taxis, we did include a $50 million program to, once those revenues came in, to address some of the concerns of boroughs outside of Manhattan. Two quick questions on behalf of one of my colleagues. Just wonder if you could expand briefly on reforming the preferential lease and and the impact on affordable housing.
I'll say something quickly, and then Simonia Brown will jump in. Right now, we have a situation that's really a crisis for a lot of everyday New Yorkers. They come to a lease agreement under a preferential dynamic. From their perspective, that's supposed to be a stable situation. These are a lot of hardworking people that are barely making ends meet. and then out of nowhere, a landlord is in a position to jack up the rent very, very substantially. There's no guarantees and protections in the process. We think there needs to be clearer regulation to protect thousands and thousands of New Yorkers who right now have those preferential rents and need to know exactly what guarantees they have going forward. Would you like to add?
Yes, I would just add that, yes, there definitely is a loophole that is being used by landlords to, like the mayor said, skyrocket rents. But HPD actually uses preferential rent levels in some of their preservation projects. And so we are basically closely analyzing the impact of any policy changes would have on our ability to do that.
Right, so that needs to be taken into account, but I think from the most foundational piece of this discussion is the current status quo of preferential rent leads to a number of people put in a situation where they either can't stay in the apartment or it's an untenable amount of money they're having to pay. This is an area that needs a tighter regulation.
Senate?
And I think just to close, Senator John Liu, second round.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, thanks for your patience, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of follow-up questions from on topics you've talked about already. As you know, we are in the legislature deliberating what we can do to expand health care to New Yorkers.
Yes.
And you have seemed to have come up with a magic solution or seemingly magic solution for the residents of New York City. So my simple question is, if your plan succeeds at roughly a cost of $100 million a year, does that mean that we are able to now put together a health care for all plan for the rest of New York State and not worry about having to cover New York City residents?
Well, I would say, and this is a new area for all of us, our plan's brand new, and the idea of a single payer plan for New York State is brand new, but I believe in single payer. I believe it would be the single best way to solve the healthcare crisis. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly what the interplay would be. I do think the conditions in most of the rest of the state are different in terms of the availability of public health care. We happen to have a very highly concentrated public health care system, and that's part of our plan. But I suspect on first blush, we would need to be folded in to a single payer system. I don't have the ability to give you a really detailed analysis, but my assumption is that we are doing this right now because it's something we need to do for our people, but we also hope it is a positive example as the state considers single payer.
But my simple question is that based on everything you have said, and I agree with you, I believe that healthcare is a right as well. But we also have to face the hard numbers, and based on everything that you've said in public and today, I can only surmise that your plan, if it succeeds, it means that we can put together a plan for the state of New York that doesn't have to worry about covering the residents of New York City, of which I am, because your plan will already cover that. Let me move on to the second.
I need to respond. I'm sorry, Senator. I would like to say yes to that, but I can't. Again.
But you guaranteed health care for all New Yorkers.
Senator, we guarantee it in the context where there's not a better available option. If you had single payer, it would be a superior option for the people of the state. It would be literally universal as opposed to what we're doing, which is universal by having to put together different pieces as best we can.
All right.
So, no, I would not feel comfortable saying we would be
I
separate.
hear you. My other follow-up question is about the deal for Amazon. You have mentioned that Amazon is not getting anything that any other company would not already automatically get.
I've said, sir, I just want to clarify that there is one piece that was a specific state decision, but no specific tailor-made subsidies from the city. And the vast majority of the subsidy that Amazon got was standing incentive programs that companies would get either for new job creation or for location.
So it seems like Alphabet Inc., which is the parent corporation of Google, they apparently are creating 7,000 to 10,000 new jobs in the city of New York without getting a single nickel. Is that because they're just clueless?
I don't want to speak to different companies' approaches without knowing what they're thinking, but I can give you something I think is a broad difference. Obviously, Alphabet, Google was here in a substantial way already, and they decided to expand, and we've been very clear in the city that we do not provide tailor-made incentives. They were not moving to an outer borough location, which is what triggered some of the other incentives. It's a different situation. Again, for better or for worse, Amazon created a national competition. And I do believe that there should be a day where those type of things are discouraged by federal policy. But the reality on the ground, and I know from all the work we've done together, you can very, very ably count the dollars and cents. The reality on the ground was they created a national competition. Over 200 cities participated and wanted to get those jobs. And there were terms of engagement. And the ability to take advantage of existing subsidy programs was something that was true all over the country. So that's the context in which we were working. It's very different from the specific way that I think Alphabet and Google went about their decision.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I'm sure there'll be opportunities as we go on to continue these kinds of discussions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is, we're, for government work, not bad. We're pretty close to the 2 o'clock time we promised you.
I appreciate you run a tight ship. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, all your colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next, we will be having a hearing from Byron Brown, Mayor, City of Buffalo. It'll take a few moments